They say I can't walk. They say I should be grateful for the $43,000 wheelchair my father bought. They say the pain is in my head. They're wrong about all of it, but I've been too afraid to scream. My name is Sienna Thorne. I'm 16 years old, and this is the story of how I found my voice. Before we dive into what happens next, if you appreciate stories about ordinary people who risk everything to stand up for what's right, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more incredible, true stories of courage and transformation. And if this story touches your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe that one voice can change everything. Now let's go back to where it all began. 5:30 in the morning, Mesa, Arizona. The desert air is still cool before the sun turns everything to fire. Sienna Thorne opened her eyes in the darkness of her bedroom and felt the familiar dread settle over her like a weight. Another day, another 16 hours of pain she'd have to hide. The transfer from bed to wheelchair was a choreographed dance she'd perfected over 730 days. 2 years, 730 mornings of this exact routine. Roll to the edge of the mattress, swing legs over the seam, brace arms against the bed frame, shift weight, pivot, lower into the chair. The wince came at the pivot point, always did. A sharp lance of fire through her lower back right between the 4th and 5th lumbar vertebrae. She bit down on it, swallowed it, made her face blank before her father could see. Diesel slept in the room down the hall. Her father, 6'3" of leather and muscle and Hell's Angels patches. A man who'd spent $43,000 trying to fix what the drunk driver had broken. A man who looked at her like she was made of glass, like she was his failure. She couldn't give him more reasons to look at her that way. The wheelchair gleamed in the pre-dawn light filtering through her window. Titanium frame, LED diagnostic panels, aerospace engineering. It looked like something from a science fiction movie. Beautiful, expensive, state-of-the-art. It was a torture device. Sienna rolled to her desk and opened the drawer. At the very back, hidden beneath old-school papers and art supplies, was a spiral notebook. Plain blue cover, nothing special to look at. She pulled it out and opened to today's entry, day 730, October 30th, 2025. She began to write the same mechanical documentation she'd been doing for 2 years. Morning transfer 710 pain scale, lower back right shoulder both knees. Duration approximately 3 minutes to complete what should take 30 seconds. Shoulder compensation for wheel misalignment begins within first 5 minutes of use. Right deltoid and trapezius bearing load left side should carry. Estimate adds 15 pounds of effective resistance per hour of use. Battery pack weight distribution, 47 pounds position too far forward. Forces spine into unnatural anterior curve to maintain balance. Compression estimated at L4-L5 junction. Chronic, worsening. She'd been keeping this journal for 730 days. Every morning, every pain point, every compensation her body had to make, every measurement she could calculate without proper tools. Because somewhere in her gut, in that place where instinct lived, Sienna knew the truth everyone else refused to see. The problem wasn't her body, the problem was the chair. But she was 16 years old, and the chair had been designed by engineers with advanced degrees. And her father had spent $43,000 trusting those experts. And every doctor who examined her said the same thing. The equipment is top of the line. Your body just needs more time to adjust. How much time? How many more days would she wake up feeling like her spine was being compressed in a vise? How many more nights would she lie awake, shoulders burning, from compensating for wheels that pulled 3 degrees to the left? At what point was it not her body that needed to adjust? Sienna closed the notebook and returned it to its hiding place. She looked at herself in the mirror above her desk. Hazel eyes that had seen too much. Brown hair that needed washing. A faded band t-shirt that hung loose on a frame that had lost weight from chronic pain, robbing her appetite. "You're not broken," she whispered to her reflection. "The chair is." But saying it to herself didn't make anyone else believe it. She rolled to the window and watched the sun start to rise over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Another day beginning, another day of silence. The notebook held 730 entries, 730 days of documented suffering. And not once had she shown it to anyone, because she was afraid. Afraid they'd tell her she was imagining it. Afraid they'd say a 16-year-old girl with a high school education couldn't possibly understand engineering better than specialists. Afraid they'd look at her with pity and frustration and that terrible crushing disappointment. Afraid her father would realize he'd spent $43,000 on something that hurt her and the guilt would destroy him. So she stayed silent, and she documented, and she survived. But survival wasn't the same as living. Sienna pulled out her phone and opened her browser. She'd been doing research for 3 weeks now. Careful, methodical research into every mechanic in Mesa and the surrounding towns. She'd read reviews, watched interviews, followed leads that most people would have dismissed. And she'd found him, Grayson Merrick, Afghanistan veteran, specialist in transmissions and suspension systems. A man who, according to 3 separate mechanics, could see problems nobody else catches. His garage was failing. His reviews talked about how he charged too little, how he'd work for free if someone was struggling, how he seemed to care more about fixing things right than making money. In other words, desperate enough to listen to a 16-year-old girl with a theory. Sienna had convinced her father to take her there today. Told him the chair needed an oil change, that the bearings were squeaking. A small lie, the bearings were fine, but she needed an excuse, needed to get her chair in front of someone who might actually see what she saw, someone who might believe her. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. 7 a.m., time to wake Diesel. Sienna took a deep breath and steeled herself for another day of pretending everything was fine. Another day of hiding the notebook, the pain, the desperate hope that today might be different. She didn't know it yet, but today would change everything. Because 23 miles away in a crumbling garage on the forgotten edge of Mesa, Grayson Merrick was about to make a choice that would save her life. Merrick Auto Repair sat on a stretch of road where ambition went to die. Cracked concrete, peeling paint on walls that had faded from white to the color of old bone, a rolling metal door that squeaked like a dying animal every time it opened. The sign outside read, "We fix what others can't." Grayson Merrick stood in the center of his garage at 6:45 in the morning, drinking gas station coffee that tasted like burnt regret, and wondered how much longer he could keep the lights on. The math was brutal and simple. $847 in his checking account. Rent due in 5 days, $1,200. The stack of final notice bills on his desk had grown so tall it had achieved sentience and was probably plotting his murder. He was 34 years old, 8 years in the Army as a vehicle mechanic with the 101st Airborne, 2 deployments to Afghanistan where he'd kept Humvees and transport trucks running through sandstorms and combat conditions. A Purple Heart he kept in a drawer because looking at it reminded him of the IED that had shattered his left leg and ended his military career. He'd come home thinking his skills would matter, thinking precision and expertise would be enough to build a life. He'd been wrong about a lot of things. The divorce papers had been finalized 3 years ago. Sarah had taken the house, the savings, and the last shreds of his belief that he could fix broken things outside of machinery. She'd said he cared more about engines than people, said he could spend 6 hours diagnosing a transmission but couldn't spend 6 minutes talking about their marriage. She wasn't entirely wrong. Grayson understood machines. They made sense. They followed rules. When something was broken, there was always a reason, always a solution. You just had to be willing to look close enough, listen carefully enough, care enough to see what everyone else missed. People were different. People lied. People left. People looked at you with disappointment when you couldn't be what they needed you to be. Machines just needed someone who would listen. Above his workbench, pinned to the wall, was a photograph. 5 soldiers in desert camouflage arms around each other, squinting against the Afghan sun. Grayson was on the left, younger, both legs working, wearing a smile that didn't carry the weight it did now. 3 of those men were dead. KIA markers written in permanent ink across their faces in his memory. Jackson, Martinez, Deontay. Grayson had survived. And some days, usually around 3 in the morning, when the phantom pain in his left leg woke him up screaming, he wondered why. What was the point of surviving if all you did was slowly fade away in a garage nobody noticed? But then he'd look at his tools, at the photograph, at the sign outside that made promises he wasn't sure he could keep. We fix what others can't. Mechanics keep soldiers alive. That's what Sergeant Chen had told them during training. Every bolt you tighten, every system you check, that's someone's kid coming home. Grayson had taken that seriously, maybe too seriously. He'd caught a suspension flaw on a Humvee outside Kandahar that everyone else had missed. A microscopic misalignment in the shock absorbers that the engineers had signed off on. Grayson had insisted they fix it anyway. The sergeant had called him paranoid. The other mechanics had called him obsessive. 3 days later, that Humvee hit an IED. The blast should have killed everyone inside. But the properly aligned suspension had absorbed just enough of the impact that all 4 soldiers walked away with their lives. If Grayson hadn't trusted his instincts, hadn't insisted on fixing what everyone said was fine, those men would have died. He'd learned something that day. Sometimes the smallest flaw could mean the difference between life and death. Sometimes caring enough to see what others missed was the only thing standing between someone and disaster. He'd carried that lesson home with him, along with the shrapnel in his leg and the memory of friends who hadn't made it back. And now here he was, broke, alone, running a garage that barely survived month to month. But his tools were still organized. His workspace was still clean. And when someone brought him a problem, he still looked at it with the same intensity he'd brought to keeping soldiers alive, because that was the only thing he knew how to do. Grayson finished his coffee and checked his phone. 1 appointment today. A wheelchair oil change. Easy job. Wouldn't pay much, but it was something. He didn't know it yet, but in 47 minutes, his entire life was about to change. Because sometimes the universe sends you exactly the problem you were born to solve. And sometimes that problem arrives in the form of a 16-year-old girl who's been screaming silently for 2 years. Chapter 3, The Arrival. The rumble announced them before Grayson saw anything. Not 95 bikes, not yet, just one. But what a bike. The Harley-Davidson that rolled up to Merrick Auto Repair at 7:32 a.m. was a work of art, custom build, chrome so polished it looked liquid, engine tuned to perfection, producing that deep-throated growl that made bones vibrate in a way that was equal parts beautiful and threatening. It rolled to a stop outside the open bay door, and for a moment Grayson just stared. Then the rider dismounted, and every survival instinct Grayson had learned in 8 years of military service started screaming. The man was massive, 6'3" at least, broad across the shoulders in a way that suggested he didn't just ride bikes, he could probably lift them. Salt and pepper beard, long hair pulled back, and a leather vest that displayed his allegiance in patches and symbols Grayson recognized immediately. Hell's Angels, Vice President Patch, Arizona chapter. The man's eyes were hidden behind aviator sunglasses, but Grayson could feel the weight of his gaze anyway. There was something predatory in the way he moved, not aggressive, controlled, like a man who didn't need to prove he was dangerous because everyone already knew. The man stopped 10 feet from the garage entrance, looked around at the humble shop with an expression Grayson couldn't read, then spoke in a voice like gravel rolling down a mountain. "You Grayson Merrick." It wasn't really a question. "I am. Heard you're the best transmission guy in Mesa, best at seeing problems other mechanics miss." Behind the man, a custom black van pulled into the parking lot. Expensive, the kind of vehicle that suggested serious money. The side door opened, and a wheelchair lift began to descend with a mechanical whir that cut through the desert morning. And that's when Grayson saw her. Sienna Thorne was 16 years old, though her eyes carried the kind of weariness that aged her beyond her years. Bright hazel eyes that missed nothing. Long brown hair pulled into a casual ponytail. She wore a faded band t-shirt and jeans, the kind of outfit that screamed normal teenager. But there was nothing normal about the wheelchair she sat in. The device looked like something designed by aerospace engineers. Sleek titanium frame, complex joint systems, LED panels displaying diagnostics. It was the kind of equipment that cost more than Grayson made in a year. Maybe 2 years. The chair descended the lift smoothly, and Sienna maneuvered it toward the garage with practiced efficiency. Though Grayson noticed the slight grimace that crossed her face with each movement, barely visible, gone in an instant. But he'd seen it. He saw everything. "My daughter," the man said, and suddenly his dangerous edge made perfect sense. This wasn't just a biker. This was a father. "Wheelchair needs an oil change. Bearing's been squeaking." Grayson hesitated. His sign said he worked on cars and bikes. This was neither. I work on bikes and cars, he said carefully. Not medical equipment. I wouldn't want to. The man stepped closer, not threatening, just closer. You work on anything mechanical. Says so on your sign. Merrick Auto Repair. We fix what others can't. Grayson's own words thrown back at him. He looked past the man to Sienna, who'd stopped her wheelchair just outside the garage bay. She was watching him with an expression that was half curiosity, half amusement. He's not going to hurt you, she said, and there was the ghost of a smile on her face. The man didn't react to his daughter's comment, but Grayson saw the slight softening around his eyes. This terrifying man in the leather vest had a daughter who teased him, who wasn't afraid of him, who saw past the patches and the reputation to something else. Name's Diesel, the man said, and Grayson understood it was both introduction and warning. This is Sienna. Chair cost $43,000. Built by specialists in California, top of the line, but it's squeaking. And when I asked where to take it, 3 people mentioned your name. Said you see things other mechanics miss. Grayson felt the weight of expectations settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just a job. This was a test. He could feel it in the way Diesel watched him, the way Sienna waited to see what he'd say. He nodded slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that was more grease than cloth. Bring her in. Let me take a look. Sienna rolled forward, navigating the slight lip at the garage entrance with a jarring bump that made her wince. Just a small reaction, quickly hidden. But Grayson saw it. He saw everything. Diesel followed his daughter into his presence, filling the small space. Up close, Grayson could see the details of his vest, the patches that told stories of chapters and rides and brotherhood, the silver rings on his fingers, the tattoos creeping up his neck. This was a man who'd lived a life Grayson could barely imagine, and right now that man was trusting him with his daughter. Sienna positioned her chair near Grayson's workbench in the good light where he usually diagnosed problems. She looked around the garage with genuine interest. Her eyes lingered on the organized tools, the old military photo, the humble but clean workspace. Nice shop, she said, and she sounded like she meant it. Grayson knelt beside her wheelchair, his bad leg protesting the movement, but his attention already focused on the equipment. And that's when his world shifted, because what he saw in those first 30 seconds of observation would change everything. Grayson's eyes moved over the wheelchair with the systematic precision he had learned in the Army. Weight distribution first, joint articulation second, stress points third. It took him less than a minute to understand something that made his stomach tighten with recognition. This isn't a mobility device, he thought. This is a team by a... The wheelchair was beautiful, state-of-the-art, expensive beyond anything Grayson had worked on before. And it was fundamentally catastrophically wrong. Not broken. Wrong. There's a difference. Broken means something failed. Wrong means it was built to fail. The weight distribution was backward. The battery pack, the heaviest component at 47 pounds, sat too far forward. Positioned exactly where it would put maximum pressure on Sienna's lower back instead of distributing the load through the frame. Her spine was being forced into an unnatural curve just to balance the chair's center of gravity. The wheel alignment was off. Not by much, 3 degrees, maybe 3.5, so small most people wouldn't notice. But those degrees added up. Every time Sienna moved, her body had to compensate for wheels that wanted to pull slightly left. After hours of use, that compensation would turn into chronic shoulder pain, permanent muscle strain. The joystick sensitivity was set so low that Sienna had to push hard to get the chair to respond. Grayson could see the calluses on her right hand where she gripped the control. A 16-year-old girl shouldn't have calluses from asking her wheelchair to move. And the brake system. God, the brake system. It engaged unevenly. Left side catching a fraction of a second before the right, creating a jarring stop that would snap her neck forward every single time. Grayson had seen this before. Not in a wheelchair, in a Humvee outside Kandahar. The suspension had been installed wrong. Microscopic misalignment that everyone else had signed off on. Grayson had caught it during a routine check. Had insisted they fix it despite the sergeant saying it was fine. 3 days later, that Humvee hit an IED. The proper suspension absorbed enough of the blast that all 4 soldiers walked away with their lives. If Grayson hadn't caught that flaw, hadn't insisted on fixing what everyone else said was good enough, those men would have died. He was looking at the same kind of flaw now. Different machine. Same principle. This wheelchair was torturing Sienna in slow motion. Every single day. How long you been using this chair? Grayson asked, his voice quiet. Sienna tilted her head, surprised by the question. Most people asked about the accident, about what happened to her, about whether she'd ever walk again. Nobody asked about the chair. 2 years, she said, since the accident. It hurt, Grayson asked. He was still examining the frame, his fingers tracing the support struts, feeling for stress fractures. Sienna went very still. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than before. Yeah, my shoulders, my back. But they said it's the best money can buy. Top engineers, custom built. So I figured it's just me, my body adjusting. Grayson looked up at her then, and something in his chest cracked. She'd been in pain for 2 years, and she thought it was her fault. Thought her body was failing to adjust to equipment that was supposed to help her. She'd been suffering, and she blamed herself because everyone told her the chair was perfect. Money doesn't always mean right, Grayson said softly. Behind him, Diesel's voice cut through the garage like a blade. Something you want to say, mechanic? There was warning in those words. Danger. Grayson could feel the temperature in the room drop. He was about to contradict $43,000 worth of expert engineering. About to tell a Hells Angels vice president that he'd been failed by the specialists he'd trusted with his daughter's life. Every survival instinct Grayson had screamed at him to shut up, to fix the squeak, to take his money and send them on their way, to stay small and stay safe. But Sienna was looking at him now, and her eyes held something that cut through his fear. Hope. Desperate, fragile hope. That maybe, just maybe, someone finally saw what she'd been too afraid to say. That maybe she wasn't crazy. That maybe the pain wasn't her fault. Grayson had learned in the desert that sometimes the smallest mechanical flaw could mean the difference between life and death. He'd learned that staying silent when you saw a problem didn't keep you safe. It just meant someone else would pay the price for your cowardice. Mechanics keep soldiers alive. Every bolt matters. Every system check matters. This girl was being crushed by equipment that was supposed to save her. And Grayson could fix it. He stood slowly, his leg complaining, and wiped his hands on his rag. The next words out of his mouth would either save Sienna or destroy him. He chose Sienna. Grayson took a breath, held it, released it slowly. Then he looked directly at Diesel and said the words that would change everything. I can fix the squeak, but if you want, I could fix the real problem. The silence that followed was the kind you could cut with a knife. Diesel didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, 6'3" of controlled danger waiting. Finally, his jaw tightened. What problem? Grayson kept his voice calm, respectful, technical, the same tone he'd used briefing officers in the Army when he'd found critical flaws in equipment. The chair's built wrong, weights backward, alignments off. Stress points are torture on her body. Whoever designed it focused on looking advanced, not on comfort or function. She's been in pain because the engineering is fundamentally flawed. Diesel's entire body went rigid. Cost me 43 grand. Specialists from California, multiple engineers, doctors signed off on it. And you're telling me they're all wrong. I'm not saying they're bad at their chun, Grayson said, and he meant it. I'm saying they don't listen to machines the way a mechanic does. They design what looks impressive. I'm looking at what works, and this doesn't work. Not for her. Sienna had gone completely still in her chair, her hands gripped tight on the armrests. Grayson could see her barely breathing, waiting to see what would happen, waiting to see if her father would accept this or explode. Diesel took off his sunglasses slowly. His eyes were gray, hard as steel. And they pinned Grayson in place like a butterfly on a board. You got some balls, mechanic. I'll give you that. You're either the best I've ever met or you're running the stupidest con in history. I'm not conning anyone, Grayson said. I'm telling you what I see. Your daughter's been suffering for 2 years because nobody wanted to admit the emperor had no clothes. Well, I'm not afraid to say it. The chair's wrong. I can fix it. Or you can take it somewhere else and she can hurt for another 2 years. The garage went silent again. Then Sienna leaned forward suddenly, her voice breaking the standoff. You really think you can make it better? Grayson finally looked away from Diesel and focused on her. Just her. I know I can. Sienna's hands were shaking. She gripped the armrests of her wheelchair to steady them, but inside her heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst through her chest. He sees it. He actually sees it. For 2 years, she'd been documenting her pain, mapping it, calculating it, teaching herself mechanical engineering from YouTube videos at 2 in the morning when the ache in her shoulders wouldn't let her sleep. For 2 years, she'd been screaming in the only language she knew: data, measurements, observations, and no one had heard her. Until now. "Wait here," Sienna said suddenly. She rolled to the van where Diesel had left her bag. Her father and Grayson watched as she pulled out a notebook, blue spiral bound, worn at the edges from 2 years of constant use. She rolled back to the garage and stopped directly in front of Grayson. "Before you say anything else," she said, her voice steadier now, "before my dad decides whether to trust you or kill you, you should see this." She held out the notebook. Grayson took it carefully, like it might break. Open to the first page. Day 1, October 30th, 2023, age 14. And there in Sienna's careful handwriting was everything. Grayson flipped through the pages slowly. His expression shifted from curious to focused to something that looked like anger mixed with sadness. 730 days of documentation, pain scales, duration logs, sketches of the wheelchair's mechanics with annotations about what felt wrong, calculations about weight distribution, measurements of wheel alignment taken with nothing but a protractor and determination, force diagrams, pressure point maps, graphs tracking pain intensity correlated with hours of use. This wasn't a diary. This was a research project. Sophisticated, methodical, the work of someone who taught themselves engineering out of desperate necessity. "You did this." Grayson looked up at her. "All of it," Sienna nodded. "I'm not an engineer, but I've lived in this chair for 730 days, 16 hours a day. That's 11,680 hours of data. And I know something is wrong with the weight distribution, the wheel alignment, the brake timing." She pulled out one of her sketches, a detailed drawing of the wheelchair's battery placement with calculations about center of gravity. "I calculated the batteries too far forward by approximately 8 inches. It's 47 pounds, creating anterior spinal compression at the L4-L5 junction. I estimated the force at constant pressure equivalent to carrying a 40-pound weight on my lower back all day, every day." Grayson stared at the sketch, then at her, then back at the sketch. "Your calculation is almost exactly right," he said quietly. "The battery's 47 pounds, positioned 8.3 inches too far forward. You're off by 0.3 inches. "I don't have proper measuring tools," Sienna said. "Just a ruler and online calculators." "You taught yourself this from scratch. From YouTube and engineering textbooks from the library, and forums where mechanics talk about suspension systems and weight distribution. I figured if I understood the principles, I could understand what was wrong with my chair." Diesel was staring at his daughter like he'd never seen her before. "Sienna, why didn't you tell me?" She turned to her father, and Grayson saw tears forming in her eyes. "Because you spent $43,000, Dad. Because you consulted the best specialists. Because everyone told me this chair was perfect and I should be grateful. Because I didn't want you to think I was ungrateful or that you'd wasted all that money on something that didn't work." Her voice broke. "Because I thought if the experts said it was right, then the problem must be me. My body, my failure to adjust. And I didn't want to be your failure too." The silence in the garage was absolute. Then Diesel knelt in front of his daughter's wheelchair. This massive, dangerous man with Hell's Angels patches and a reputation for violence knelt in the oil-stained concrete of a failing garage and took his daughter's hands. "You have never been my failure," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I failed you. I trusted credentials over you. I listened to specialists instead of listening to you. I saw the chair and not the girl in it." He looked up at Grayson. "Can you really fix this?" Grayson held up Sienna's notebook. "She's already done half the work. She's mapped every problem. All I have to do is implement her solutions." "I'll help," Sienna said quickly. "I'll answer any questions. I know this chair better than anyone. Better than the engineers who built it because they only looked at it on paper. I've lived in it." Grayson looked at this 16-year-old girl who taught herself mechanical engineering to understand her own torture. Who documented 11,680 hours of suffering in precise scientific detail? Who'd been screaming and dated you for 2 years because no one would listen to her voice? How fast can you do it? Diesel asked. To do it right, 24 hours. Full rebuild. But I'll need to keep the chair. She'll have to use something else temporarily. Diesel stood. We have a standard manual wheelchair in the van. She can use that. Dad, Sienna started. 24 hours, Diesel interrupted. He looked at Grayson and all the dangerous edge was back. You have 24 hours to rebuild that chair. You make it right. You make it so my daughter stops hurting. And if you're wrong, if you're playing us, if you make it worse. He didn't finish the threat. Didn't need to. You'll answer to me and 94 of my brothers. At dawn. Understood. Grayson met his eyes and didn't flinch. Understood. Diesel moved to help Sienna transfer to the standard wheelchair. The process was gentle, practiced. The movements of a father who'd done this 1,000 times. As they prepared to leave, Sienna looked back at Grayson. My notebook, she said. Take it, use my research, all of it. I've been working on this problem for 2 years. Every measurement, every calculation, every observation. It's all there. Thank you, Grayson said. No. Sienna's eyes were wet but fierce. Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Not just the disability, not just a case study. Me. Thank you for believing that a 16-year-old girl might actually know what she's talking about. The van door closed. The engine started. Diesel's Harley rumbled to life. And then they were gone. Grayson stood alone in his garage looking at a $43,000 wheelchair he'd just promised to rebuild in 24 hours, knowing that if he was wrong, 95 Hell's Angels would be coming for him at dawn. He looked at Sienna's notebook, opened it to a random page and saw her handwriting, day 427. Pain scale 810, shoulder compensation for misaligned wheels causing chronic strain. Calculate 3 degrees deviation left. Estimate equivalent to carrying 15 pounds additional resistance per hour of use. Duration constant when active. She'd been right about everything. Every calculation, every observation, every desperate notation in this notebook represented a piece of suffering she'd endured while everyone told her she was wrong. Grayson looked at his wall, at the photograph of 5 soldiers, at the 3 KIA markers written in memory across the faces of men who hadn't come home. Mechanics keep soldiers alive. Every bolt matters. Every system check matters. This girl had been dying slowly, not from her injury, from equipment that was supposed to save her. And tomorrow morning, 95 Hell's Angels would arrive to judge whether Grayson Merrick was the man who saved her or the fool who made everything worse. He looked at the wheelchair gleaming under his fluorescent lights, at Sienna's notebook full of desperate calculations, at the clock on the wall showing 8:47 a.m., 23 hours and 13 minutes until dawn. Grayson rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Chapter 6, The Vigil. The disassembly began at 9 a.m. and it was methodical, surgical. Every component laid out in systematic order on his workbench like a battlefield autopsy. Frame sections here, wheel assemblies there, control systems and wiring in their own designated space. The battery pack, heavy and off balance, went on the scale. 47 pounds exactly positioned, exactly where it would cause maximum strain on Sienna's lower back. Grayson worked slowly, fighting the urge to rush. Rushing caused mistakes. Mistakes could hurt Sienna. He couldn't afford mistakes. As his hands moved over the components, his mind cataloged problems faster than he could document them. The seat cushion wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. The foam compressed unevenly, creating pressure points that would cause sores after extended use. He'd seen similar issues with poorly designed body armor in the Army. Soldiers would come back from patrol with bruising and skin damage because the weight distribution was wrong. This was the same principle, just a different application. The footrests made Grayson actually angry. They were mounted 2 inches too far forward. 2 inches. It seemed like nothing. But those 2 inches meant Sienna's knees were forced into hyperextension for hours at a time. Chronic knee pain, potential long-term joint damage. And nobody had noticed because nobody had asked her to demonstrate how she actually sat in the chair for extended periods. They'd measured her once in a clinical setting, probably while she was fresh and alert. They hadn't measured her after 6 hours of use when fatigue set in and her body started compensating in ways that would cause permanent damage. Grayson opened Sienna's notebook and cross-referenced her observations with what he was finding. Day 89, knee pain increasing, suspect footrest position, forcing hyperextension, estimate 2 inches too far forward based on natural leg length versus enforced position. She'd been right, exactly right. A 16-year-old girl with a ruler and determination had diagnosed a problem that engineers with advanced degrees had missed. The afternoon bled into evening. The sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Grayson barely noticed. He was in the zone now, the place where time disappeared and there was only the problem and the solution. His phone buzzed at 6 p.m., a text from a number he didn't recognize. Unknown, this is Sienna. Got your number from my dad. Just wanted to say thank you again. And no pressure, but I've been researching incomplete spinal injuries tonight. Found a study that says if chronic pain is eliminated and proper alignment maintained, there's a chance for partial mobility recovery. My injury was classified incomplete. Just thought you should know. No pressure. Really. Thank you for trying. Grayson read the message 3 times. She'd been researching medical journals. While he was rebuilding her care, she was calculating the possibility that fixing her equipment might let her spine heal. The weight of that responsibility settled over him like a physical thing. He texted back, working on it, using every measurement from your notebook. You did good research, Sienna, really good. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Sienna, I spent 2 years documenting because I didn't know what else to do. Thought if I had enough data, eventually someone would listen. Thank you for being that someone. Grayson set his phone down and looked at the disassembled wheelchair, at the notebook, at his hands scarred and oil-stained from 2 decades of fixing broken things. Sometimes the smallest flaw could mean the difference between life and death. He'd learned that in Kandahar. He was remembering it now. Around 8 p.m. while examining the seat assembly, Grayson's fingers brushed against something that didn't belong. Paper, tucked deep inside the cushion where nobody would see it unless they completely disassembled the chair. He pulled it out carefully, unfolding what turned out to be a small piece of notebook paper, the edges worn soft from age and compression. The handwriting was young, feminine, careful. Someone please help. It hurts. 4 words. That was all. 4 words that Sienna had written and hidden where nobody would find them because she'd been told by experts that the chair was perfect. 4 words that said she'd been screaming silently for 2 years and nobody had heard her. Grayson taped the note next to the photograph of his army unit. Both were reminders. Both were reasons. Mechanics keep soldiers alive. Every bolt you tighten, every system you check, that's someone's kid coming home. This wasn't about proving he was right. This was about saving this girl from 2 more years of suffering. Maybe more. Maybe forever. He picked up his wrench and got back to work. 11 p.m. hit Grayson like a physical weight. He'd been working for 14 hours straight. His bad leg was throbbing from standing too long. His back was screaming from hunching over the workbench. The garage was littered with wheelchair components, scattered tools, discarded designs he'd sketched and rejected. And suddenly, sitting on the cold, concrete floor, surrounded by the evidence of his audacity, Grayson felt the doubt creep in like poison through his veins. What if I'm wrong? The question arrived quietly at first, then grew louder with each passing second. What if I'm wrong? What if the California engineers were right, and I'm just some broke mechanic with delusions of competence? What if I make it worse? What if Sienna gets hurt because I was too arrogant to admit I was in over my head? He could see his ex-wife's face as clearly as if she were standing in front of him. Sarah, 3 years since the divorce, but her words still cut deep. They'd been fighting about something. He couldn't even remember what anymore. And she looked at him with exhausted frustration and said, "You always think you know better than everyone else, Grayson. The doctors, the therapists, the counselors, everyone. One day it's going to cost you everything." She'd been right in a way. His stubbornness, his inability to admit he might be wrong had contributed to the end of their marriage. He'd been so certain he could fix things, fix them, fix himself if everyone would just listen to him. But he couldn't, and she'd left. And now here he was making the same mistake again, thinking he knew better than the experts, thinking he could see what trained engineers couldn't, thinking his instincts were more valuable than their degrees. Grayson's phone sat on the workbench. Diesel's number programmed in from when they'd exchanged contact information. He picked it up, finger hovering over the dial button. He could call right now. Apologize. Say he'd been hasty, that he needed more time, that maybe they should get a second opinion from other specialists. Diesel would be angry, but Grayson would survive. He could live with looking like a fool. What he couldn't live with was hurting Sienna. The phone felt heavy in his hand, the weight of potential failure crushing his chest. Then his eyes landed on the note. Someone please help, it hurts. 4 words that Sienna had been too afraid or too conditioned to say out loud. 4 words that represented 2 years of suffering she blamed on herself because everyone told her the equipment was perfect. Grayson set the phone down. He looked at the wheelchair frame, really looked at it, and something shifted in his perspective. He stopped seeing it as a medical device built by experts he was challenging. He started seeing it as a prison someone had built without meaning to. A cage constructed from good intentions and expensive materials and absolute certainty that they knew what was best. But they hadn't asked Sienna what she needed. They'd told her, and she'd suffered in silence because she thought the problem was her, not them. Grayson had been wrong before. God knew he'd been wrong plenty of times. His marriage, his business decisions, his belief that he could make civilian life work outside the military structure that had given him purpose. But this he knew. Not because he had degrees or credentials or expensive equipment, because he'd spent 8 years keeping soldiers alive by seeing the things other people missed. Because he understood that machines were built by humans and humans made mistakes. Because he'd learned in the most brutal classroom imaginable that sometimes the smallest flaw could mean the difference between life and death. I've been wrong before, Grayson said out loud to the empty garage, his voice rough with exhaustion and conviction. But I'm not wrong about this. The clock on the wall showed midnight, 6.5 hours left. Grayson stood up, his leg complaining his back, protesting, his hand steady as stone. He had work to do. The rebuilding began in earnest at 12:15 a.m. and it was radical. The titanium plating that made up the lower frame looked impressive, but it was 12 pounds of unnecessary metal. Beautiful, expensive, completely wrong for what Sienna needed. Grayson carefully cut away the excess, his angle grinder, throwing sparks across the garage floor like small fireworks. In its place, he used carbon fiber panels he'd salvaged from a motorcycle fairing months ago, a crashed sport bike totaled by insurance, but the carbon fiber was still good. Strong, light, perfect. He worked slowly, precisely bonding the carbon fiber to the frame with epoxy that would cure stronger than the original welds. Lighter means less strain, he murmured to himself, documenting his process the way he used to document repairs in the Army. Less strain means less pain. Every ounce matters when you're carrying it for 16 hours a day. 12 pounds might not sound like much, but try carrying a 12-pound weight on your lower back all day, every day for 2 years. That's what Sienna had been doing. Not anymore. The second modification was dynamic alignment, and this required precision Grayson had only achieved a handful of times in his career. The wheelbase needed to be exactly 3 inches longer to properly distribute Sienna's weight. Too short and the chair would be unstable. Too long and it would be unwieldy. He measured 7 times before making a single cut. In the Army, they had a saying, measure twice, cut once. Grayson measured 7 times because Sienna's spine depended on him getting this exactly right. He rebuilt the frame extensions using reinforced aluminum, adjusting the mounting points so the wheels would track perfectly parallel. The center of gravity shifted backward exactly where it needed to be. Now Sienna's spine could sit naturally instead of being forced into a curve just to keep the chair balanced. He tested it empty, pushing the frame back and forth across the garage floor, feeling how it moved. Smooth, stable, right. The third modification came from an unexpected source. Grayson had a mountain bike hanging in the corner of his garage, a relic from better financial times when he'd had money for hobbies. The bike had expensive micro-shock absorbers in the wheel hubs designed to absorb trail impacts. He'd never thought about applying that technology to a wheelchair until now. He carefully removed the shock absorbers and adapted them to fit Sienna's wheelchair wheels. It took 3 hours of machining, custom mounting brackets, testing compression ratios, adjusting spring tension. But when he finished, the wheels had a float effect that would absorb bumps instead of transferring every shock directly into Sienna's body. Every crack in the sidewalk, every threshold between rooms, every tiny imperfection in the ground that used to jar her spine. The chair would absorb it now, not her body. The fourth modification was the joystick, and this made Grayson understand something about the original engineers. They designed the control system to be precise, which meant they'd made it require significant pressure to activate. Precise for them, torture for Sienna. Grayson recalibrated the sensitivity, increasing it by 40%. Now the joystick would respond to the lightest touch. Sienna wouldn't have to strain her arm anymore, wouldn't develop calluses from gripping too hard, wouldn't exhaust her shoulder muscles just asking the chair to move. The original engineers weren't bad people. Grayson believed that. They just weren't listening. They'd built what they thought she needed based on theory and specifications. Grayson was building what Sienna actually needed based on 2 years of her hidden suffering. That's the difference between engineering and mechanics. Engineers design, mechanics solve. The fifth and final modification was comfort engineering, and Grayson approached it the way a craftsman approaches fine detail work. He rebuilt the seat from scratch using memory foam layered with medical-grade gel packs he'd ordered from a supplier who owed him a favor. The foam would conform to Sienna's body, distributing pressure evenly. The gel would prevent heat buildup and provide cushioning that wouldn't compress unevenly over time. He repositioned the footrest based on measurements he'd taken from the standard wheelchair Diesel had brought. Sienna's actual leg length, not some theoretical measurement from a clinical assessment, 2 inches back. It seemed like such a small change. Those 2 inches would save her knees from years of cumulative damage. The armrest got adjusted to her natural resting position, not where some ergonomic chart said they should be, but where Sienna's arms would actually rest when she was tired, when she was relaxed, when she was just existing in the chair instead of sitting up straight for doctors and specialists. 5:30 a.m. The sun was starting to paint the eastern sky with the first hints of light. Grayson stepped back from the workbench and looked at what he'd created. The wheelchair looked different, sleeker, less like medical equipment and more like a precision instrument built for a specific purpose. He tested every joint, every movement, every system. The wheels rolled smoothly, the shock absorbers compressed and released with perfect tension. The joystick responded to the barest touch. Everything flowed the way machinery should flow when it's built right. Built for the person who needs it, not for the people who designed it. Grayson sat down against the wall, his body finally registering just how exhausted he was. 20 hours straight, no sleep, no food beyond gas station coffee and vending machine snacks. His left leg felt like it was on fire. His hands were cramping. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. But the wheelchair was done, and it was right. He knew it in his bones, in his blood, in every instinct honed by 8 years of keeping soldiers alive in a war zone. His phone buzzed. 6 a.m., text from an unknown number. Unknown. This is Diesel. We're leaving now. We'll arrive at your garage at 6:47 a.m. 95 of my brothers are coming with me. I hope you're ready, Merrick. For your sake and for my daughter's. Grayson looked at the rebuilt wheelchair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. At Sienna's notebook open on his workbench, pages filled with 2 years of desperate calculations. At the hidden note taped next to his army photo. Someone please help, it hurts. He closed his eyes just for a moment and whispered to the empty garage. To Sienna, to whatever force in the universe listened to desperate mechanics. Please let this work. 47 minutes until 95 Hell's Angels would arrive to decide if Grayson Merrick was a genius or a dead man. 47 minutes until Sienna Thorne would find out if someone had finally heard her scream. 47 minutes until everything changed. The sun rose through the garage windows, the same light that had been there when this all started. Morning coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. And in the distance, just barely audible over the desert wind, came a sound that made Grayson's heart start to pound. The rumble of motorcycles. Not one. 95. They were coming. The rumble started low, like distant thunder rolling across the Arizona desert. Then it grew and grew until the sound became physical, vibrating through the concrete floor, rattling the windows, shaking dust from the rafters of Merrick Auto Repair. 1 Harley, then 5, then 20, then so many Grayson stopped counting. 95 motorcycles. 95 members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, all converging on his failing garage at 6:47 a.m. like a leather-clad arm answering a call to war. Grayson stood in the center of his shop, the rebuilt wheelchair beside him, and watched through the open bay door as the bikes filled every available space. The street, the parking lot, the empty lots on either side, they arranged themselves with military precision, a formation that suggested absolute unity and unbreakable purpose. The sound of 95 engines was overwhelming. Then one by one they cut off, and the silence that followed was somehow more intimidating than the noise had been. Leather vests everywhere, patches and insignias telling stories Grayson could only imagine, beards and sunglasses and faces that revealed nothing. These weren't just bikers. This was a brotherhood, and right now their focus was entirely on him. Diesel dismounted his bike slowly, taking his time, letting the moment build. His brothers parted as he walked through them, a sea of leather and chrome, opening a path for their vice president. He stopped 10 feet from the garage entrance, removed his aviator sunglasses with deliberate precision. Those gray eyes found Grayson and held him pinned. "Where is it?" Grayson gestured to the wheelchair on his workbench. "I kept my promise." Diesel walked forward. His brothers followed like a tide. They crowded around the rebuilt wheelchair, some kneeling to examine it closer, others hanging back but watching intently. Grayson could hear murmurs, technical assessments from men who knew machinery. "It's different. Lighter. Look at the frame modification. Wheelbase is longer. Center of gravity shifted back. What's that system in the wheel hubs? Shock absorbers. Carbon fiber panels instead of titanium. Smart. Reduces weight without sacrificing strength." Diesel circled the wheelchair slowly, his hands behind his back, not touching, just examining every detail. The carbon fiber panels, the adjusted wheelbase, the shock-absorbed wheels, the rebuilt seat. He spent 5 full minutes on his inspection. Grayson barely breathed the entire time. Finally, Diesel straightened up, looked directly at Grayson. "Talk me through it." So Grayson did. He explained each modification, each decision, why he'd made the changes he'd made. He used simple language showing respect for their intelligence without talking down to them. These men might not have engineering degrees, but they understood machines. They understood function over form. They understood what worked and what didn't. Some of the bikers nodded along as Grayson explained the weight redistribution. Others asked questions about the shock absorbers. Technical questions that showed they were really listening, really understanding. A few remained stone-faced, reserving judgment until they saw results. Diesel didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just stood there absorbing every word Grayson said. Those gray eyes evaluating not just the wheelchair, but Grayson himself, looking for lies, for uncertainty, for any sign that Grayson was selling them something he didn't believe in. When Grayson finished his explanation, the silence returned. Diesel studied the wheelchair for another long moment. Then he looked at Grayson, and the weight of that gaze was almost physical. Finally, Diesel removed his sunglasses slowly, and Grayson saw that his eyes were wet, not crying, just the sheen of emotion barely held in check. "Sienna's in the van," Diesel said, his voice rougher than before. "Let's see if you're a genius or a dead man." The van door opened with a hydraulic hiss. Sienna appeared in the entrance, and Grayson could see she hadn't slept. Dark circles under those hazel eyes, hair pulled back in the same ponytail, but messier now. She wore a different band t-shirt, but the same expression she'd had yesterday. Cautious, guarded, desperately wanting to believe, but terrified of disappointment. She'd spent the night in that standard manual wheelchair, researching medical journals about spinal injury recovery, calculating possibilities, building hope on a foundation that might crumble the moment she sat in that rebuilt chair and found out nothing had changed. Grayson understood that look. He'd worn it himself. The face of someone who'd learned not to hope too much because hope hurt when it died. Diesel moved to help her, and for a moment the dangerous biker disappeared completely. This was just a father helping his daughter. His movements gentle, practiced. The routine of 2 years. He lifted her carefully from the standard wheelchair. Sienna was light in his arms, fragile in a way that made Grayson's chest tight. She was trusting him. They both were. Trusting a broke mechanic with a bum leg and a failing garage to do what million-dollar specialists couldn't. Diesel carried her to the rebuilt wheelchair, set her down with infinite care, and the world held its breath. Sienna settled into the seat. Her hands found the armrests, and her eyes widened immediately. "It's lighter," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. "Why is it so much lighter?" Her hands moved over the armrests, feeling their new position. Natural, where her arms actually wanted to rest. Her feet settled onto the footrests, and Grayson saw the moment she registered the difference. 2 inches. Just 2 inches. But her knees were at the right angle now. No hyperextension, no strain. Her back straightened, not forced, not compensating, just naturally settling into proper alignment because the weight distribution finally let her spine rest the way it was supposed to. "The battery," Grayson said quietly, "repositioned 8 inches back. Reduced overall weight by 12 pounds with the carbon fiber. Your spine isn't carrying the load anymore. The frame is." Sienna's hands were shaking as she reached for the joystick. She touched it with just her fingertips. Barely any pressure at all. The wheelchair responded instantly. No lag, no resistance, no having to push hard and wait for the system to catch up. Just immediate smooth response. She rolled forward, slow at first, testing, then faster. The chair moved like an extension of her body instead of a prison she was trapped in. She turned left, turned right. The wheels tracked perfectly straight. No compensation needed, no right shoulder burning from constant correction. Her face was transforming. The guarded expression cracking. Underneath was something Grayson hadn't seen yesterday. Joy. Pure, unbridled joy. She rolled over a crack in the parking lot pavement, the kind that used to jar her spine. The shock absorbers caught it seamlessly. Just a gentle float, barely noticeable. "I felt that," Sienna said, her voice breaking. "I felt the chair absorb it. It didn't go into my back." She did a full circle around the parking lot, then another. Faster now, more confident. Her movements fluid, natural, the way movement should be when equipment works with your body instead of against it. She tested the brakes, smooth deceleration, no jerking, no neck snap, just controlled even stopping. 95 bikers watched in absolute silence as a 16-year-old girl experienced what freedom felt like for the first time in 2 years. Tears were streaming down Sienna's face, but she was laughing. A breathless, disbelieving sound that was part joy and part release of 2 years of suffering finally acknowledged. She rolled back to the garage, stopped directly in front of Grayson, looked up at him with those hazel eyes wet and shining. "I forgot," she said, and her voice was barely a whisper. "I forgot what it felt like to not hurt." Those words hit Grayson harder than any punch ever could. For 2 years, Sienna had been in constant pain, and she'd forgotten that life could be different. She'd accepted suffering as her new normal because everyone told her the equipment was perfect, and the problem must be her. But it wasn't her. It had never been her. Diesel had been watching his daughter with an expression that cycled through disbelief, joy, and something that might have been grief for all the pain she'd endured unnecessarily. His jaw was clenched tight, fighting to maintain control, fighting not to break down in front of his brothers. He removed his sunglasses completely now, not caring that his eyes were wet, not caring that everyone could see the emotion he usually kept locked down. He walked toward Grayson slowly, and Grayson tensed instinctively. This was still Diesel, still the vice president of the Hells Angels, still a man who could destroy Grayson with a word to his brothers, still a father who just realized his daughter had been suffering when she didn't have to be. Diesel stopped inches from Grayson. The garage, the parking lot, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then Diesel extended his hand. "You saw what million-dollar engineers missed," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion that he wasn't trying to hide anymore. "You saw my daughter when they just saw a case study. You believed her when everyone else told her she was wrong." Grayson took his hand. Diesel's grip was firm, but not threatening. They shook. Two men from completely different worlds connected by a 16-year-old girl who'd suffered in silence until someone finally listened. The silence that had blanketed the parking lot shattered. Bikers started clapping, whistling, shouting approval. Some of them moved forward to examine the wheelchair more closely, asking Sienna how it felt, marveling at the modifications Grayson had made. Others clapped Grayson on the shoulder, nodded their respect, accepted him in a way that transcended words. One of the older bikers, gray streaking through his beard and visible scars on his arms, wheeled forward in his own chair. His wheels didn't track straight. Grayson could see it immediately. The constant compensation, the way his right shoulder sat higher than his left from years of overuse. "I'm Hawk," the man said, his voice rough with emotion. "Lost both legs in Fallujah 2004. Been in a chair 8 years. And watching that girl roll straight for the first time in 2 years, watching her not hurt." He stopped, wiped his eyes. "Brother, if you can do for me what you did for her, I'm yours, whatever you need." Another man stepped forward, younger, maybe mid-30s, with a pronounced limp, even standing still. "Cole, blown hip IED outside Mosul 2006. Walker's too short. Been killing my back 6 years. Physical therapist says I need custom fit, but insurance won't cover it. So I live with the pain." He looked at Sienna in her chair, rolling smoothly, not compensating, not hurting. "If there's a chance you can help, I'm in." Sienna was still crying, still smiling, and she wheeled over to Grayson, reached out and grabbed his grease-stained hand with both of hers. "Thank you," she whispered, quiet enough that maybe only Grayson heard. "Thank you for seeing me. Not just a disability, not just a case study. Me. Thank you for believing that my pain mattered, that my research mattered, that I knew my body better than strangers with degrees." Grayson looked at this 16-year-old girl who'd taught herself mechanical engineering to understand her own torture, who'd documented 11,680 hours of suffering because no one would listen to her voice, who'd hidden a note in her wheelchair cushion that said, "Someone please help." And he understood something profound. This wasn't about fixing a machine. This was about giving someone back their voice, their agency, their belief that they deserved to be heard. "You did the hard work," Grayson said. "I just implemented your research." "No," Sienna shook her head fiercely. "You believed me. That was the hard work." The sun rose higher over the Arizona desert, warming the parking lot filled with 95 motorcycles and the family they represented. And Grayson Merrick, broke mechanic with a failing garage and a bum leg, realized that sometimes miracles don't come from credentials or money or expertise. Sometimes they come from someone who cares enough to really listen. But the celebration was about to take a turn Grayson hadn't anticipated. Because Sienna Thorne wasn't just grateful. She was transformed, and transformation demands action. The celebration continued for another 10 minutes. Bikers examining the wheelchair, Diesel standing with his arm around Sienna's shoulders, watching her roll back and forth with an expression of wonder mixed with guilt. The Brotherhood accepting Grayson into their ranks with handshakes and shoulder claps and promises of loyalty. Then Sienna raised her hand. It was a small gesture, but somehow everyone noticed. 95 bikers gradually quieted, turned their attention to the 16-year-old girl in the rebuilt wheelchair. She sat in the center of the parking lot, the morning sun behind her, and when she spoke, her voice carried with a clarity and strength that hadn't been there yesterday. "This can't just be about me." The words hung in the air, simple, devastating. Diesel started to speak. "Sienna," she cut him off with a look, the same fierce determination Grayson had seen in her notebook, in her hidden note, in 2 years of desperate research. "Dad, listen. Please, just listen." She turned to address the entire gathering. "Yesterday I was in pain, every single day for 2 years, and I thought it was my fault, that my body was broken, that I needed to adjust, that the problem was me." Her hands gripped the armrests of her rebuilt chair. "But it wasn't me, it was never me. And how many other people are out there right now thinking the same thing? Thinking they're broken when really their equipment is failing them." She pulled out her phone, pulled up something she'd clearly prepared during her sleepless night. According to VA records, there are 127 disabled veterans in Mesa and Chandler. 127 people who served their country, got hurt, and came home to a system that doesn't give a damn about them. Her voice gained strength. The VA gives them garbage equipment, cheapest bids, lowest quality, and when they complain, they're told to adjust, to be grateful, to stop making trouble. Hawk wheeled closer. "The kid's right. I've been dealing with VA equipment for 8 years. Every complaint gets the same response. That's the best we can provide with current budget constraints." Cole stepped forward. "My walker came from the VA. They measured me once standing up fresh in the morning, gave me standard size. Never asked how I'd feel after 6 hours, after 12 hours. Never checked back." Sienna nodded. "Exactly. They don't listen to the people using the equipment. They just check boxes and move on. She looked directly at Grayson. You have a gift. You see what others miss. And you're struggling to keep this garage open, which means you're probably not turning away work. But these veterans need help. Real help. Not just someone to maintain equipment. Someone to fix what's wrong with it. Grayson opened his mouth to protest. Sienna, I can't afford to work for free. This garage is barely surviving. You don't charge them, Sienna interrupted. My father's brotherhood supplies materials, tools, parts, whatever you need. You supply the skill, you supply the time, and you teach others. She gestured to the assembled bikers. Look around. Half these men know basic mechanics. They can learn. You teach them what to look for, how to diagnose problems, how to listen to users instead of just reading spec sheets. We become a team. Diesel was staring at his daughter like he'd never seen her before. This wasn't the quiet girl who'd hidden her pain for 2 years. This was someone else. Someone who'd found her voice and wasn't going to be silent anymore. I'll organize everything, Sienna continued. Intake system, appointments, documentation. I spent 2 years learning how to document pain and mechanical failures. I can teach other people to do the same. We'll create before and after records, success metrics, proof that this works. She looked at her father. Dad, your brotherhood is supposed to protect people. These veterans protected in all of us. They gave their bodies, their futures, and our system thanks them with equipment that hurts them. Because profits matter more than people. Because nobody wants to admit the emperor has no clothes. She rolled forward, addressed the entire gathering. I was silent for 2 years, suffering every day, too afraid to speak up because I thought the problem was me. But it wasn't, and I won't be silent anymore. Her voice rose. So here's what I'm asking. Grayson fixes what's broken. We supply what he needs. And together we help every veteran in this city who's been told to adjust to equipment that's failing them. She looked at Hawk, at Cole, at the dozens of other bikers who were nodding along. Who's with me? The response was immediate, overwhelming. Hawk removed the dog tags from around his neck. The metal was worn smooth from years of wear. 3 tours in Fallujah written in the serial number. He wheeled over to Grayson and pressed them into his hand. You earned these, brother, more than I ever did. I'm in. Cole stepped forward. I'm in, whatever you need. One by one, the veterans in the crowd raised their hands, voiced their support, shared their stories of inadequate equipment and systemic failure. Diesel watched his daughter orchestrate this transformation with an expression of awe mixed with pride, mixed with something that might have been grief. Grief for the girl who'd hidden her pain, pride for the woman she was becoming. He stepped forward and put his hand on Grayson's shoulder. She's right. We take care of our own. And as of right now, you're one of ours. Materials, tools, parts. Whatever you need, we'll handle it. His voice dropped lower, meant just for Grayson. My daughter spent 2 years in pain because I trusted credentials over her voice. I won't make that mistake again. And if she says these veterans need help, then they need help. Grayson looked around at 95 bikers, at Hawk holding out his dog tags, at Cole with hope in his eyes for the first time in 6 years, at Sienna in her rebuilt chair, not just grateful, but galvanized into action. He thought about the stack of final notice bills on his desk, the $847 in his checking account, the rent due in 4 days. He thought about his ex-wife saying he cared more about machines than people. He thought about the photograph on his wall. 5 soldiers in Afghanistan. 3 KIA markers. Mechanics keep soldiers alive. And he realized Sienna was offering him something he'd lost when he left the army. Something he'd been searching for in this failing garage, in this isolated life. Purpose. When do we start? Grayson asked. Hawk grinned through his scarred face. Brother, we start now. Day 1 began before the sun finished rising. Hawk's wheelchair was first. Grayson approached it the same way he'd approached Sienna's. Systematic assessment, root cause analysis. Understanding not just what was broken, but why. The tracking problem was actually elegant in its simplicity once you saw it. The wheels were slightly different diameters. A manufacturing flaw so small nobody had caught it. Maybe 3 millimeters difference. Nothing you'd notice looking at the specs. But over 8 years, over thousands of miles, that tiny difference had forced Hawk to constantly compensate, destroying his shoulders in the process. Grayson rebuilt the wheel assemblies from scratch, matching them perfectly, adjusting the alignment until the chair tracked straight as an arrow. When Hawk tested it rolling across the parking lot without having to correct his course without his shoulders screaming in protest, he stopped in the middle of the lot and just sat there. His broad shoulders started shaking, and Grayson realized he was crying. Hawk rolled back to Grayson. The dog tags were still in Grayson's pocket. Hawk reached out and covered Grayson's hand with his own. 8 years, Hawk said, his voice breaking. 8 years I thought it was me, that I'd lost too much, that my body was giving up. But it was just 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters that nobody bothered to measure. He pulled back, wiped his eyes. Thank you, brother. You gave me something I forgot I could have. Hope. Day 2 brought Cole in his walker that was 2 inches too short. The modification took 3 hours. Grayson adjusted the height, added cushioned grips that wouldn't cause blisters, reinforced the frame so it could handle Cole's weight without wobbling. When Cole stood with the adjusted walker, his spine straightened for the first time in 6 years. The relief on his face was immediate, profound. He took 10 steps, 20, 30, no back pain, no compensation. His wife Marlena, who'd driven him to the garage, hugged Grayson so hard he couldn't breathe. She was crying, couldn't stop thanking him, kept saying 6 years over and over like a mantra. Grayson stood there awkwardly accepting gratitude he didn't feel he deserved. He was just fixing what should have been fixed from the beginning. Day 3 changed everything. The bikers arrived with trucks full of equipment, new tools still in their packaging, materials Grayson had only dreamed of affording, a professional pneumatic lift, welding equipment that didn't spark and sputter like his old gear. They installed better lighting, transforming the dim garage into a proper workspace. LED strips that made every detail visible. No more shadows, no more squinting, and they stayed. Learning, watching how Grayson diagnosed problems, taking notes on his modifications, understanding the principles so they could replicate them. Diesel personally installed the overhead lighting while Sienna organized the new materials. She created a system that made sense. Tools grouped by function, parts cataloged by type and so on. Everything labeled, everything accessible. The garage was becoming something more than Grayson's failing business. It was becoming a community hub, a place where people came to be heard. By day 4, Sienna had created an intake system. She sat at a desk Diesel had brought in, laptop open, documenting everything. When a veteran arrived, she'd walk them through her process, the same process she'd developed over 2 years of suffering. Tell me where it hurts. Show me on this diagram. Rate the pain on a scale of 1 to 10. How long have you used this equipment? Has anyone asked you about pain before? Do you compensate? How? She taught them to be advocates for themselves. To document, to trust that their pain was data, not weakness. Before and after photos, video documentation, detailed notes on every modification, success metrics tracked in a spreadsheet that was growing by the day. She wasn't just organizing, she was building a case, evidence that this approach worked, that listening to users produced better outcomes than following spec sheets. And she was learning mechanics, watching Grayson work, asking questions that showed she wasn't content to just organize. She wanted to understand the principles, the engineering, the why behind every decision. Why that angle for the wheel alignment? How do you calculate the ideal center of gravity for different body types? What causes metal fatigue in wheelchair frames? Grayson found himself teaching, really teaching, not just showing her what to do, but explaining why. And she absorbed it all like someone who'd been starving for this knowledge. I want to study biomedical engineering, she told him during a lunch break on day 5. I want to design equipment that actually helps people. I want to be the engineer who listens. By day 7, the transformation was undeniable. The garage had gone from one mechanic barely surviving to an operation that functioned like a precision military unit. Grayson at the center teaching, Hawk and Cole learning fast, helping with simpler repairs, Diesel handling logistics, Sienna managing intake and documentation, 3 other bikers rotating through picking up skills, spreading knowledge. They'd helped 17 veterans in 1 week. 17 people who walked or rolled out of that garage with less pain than they'd arrived with. But day 7 also brought something unexpected. A local news van pulled up at 2 p.m. Camera crew. Reporter. Someone had tipped them off. Probably one of the veterans Grayson had helped. Grayson was immediately uncomfortable, tried to wave them away. This wasn't about publicity. This was about fixing what was broken. But Sienna intervened. She wheeled herself between Grayson and the camera, positioned herself deliberately, and spoke with a confidence that belied her 16 years. "This man sees what nobody else sees," she told the reporter, her voice clear and strong. "Experts see specifications and regulations. Grayson sees people. He sees suffering, and he can't look away." The reporter, a woman named Jennifer Ochoa, focused her camera on Sienna. "He doesn't fix machines," Sienna continued. "He fixes lives. He believed a 16-year-old girl when million-dollar specialists wouldn't. He trusted that my pain was real, that my research mattered, that I deserved better than being told to adjust." She gestured to the garage behind her. "And now he's doing the same for veterans who've been abandoned by the system that sent them to war. He's teaching others, building a community, proving that expertise doesn't always come with credentials. Sometimes it comes from caring enough to listen." The interview aired that night on the local news. By morning, Grayson's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Day 8 brought more veterans than Grayson could handle in a single day. Not just bikers now. Word had spread through VA clinics and veterans support groups in whispered conversations in physical therapy waiting rooms. There's a mechanic in Mesa who actually listens. There's a guy who sees what doctors miss. There's someone who gives a damn. Grayson started working 16-hour days, barely stopping to eat, running on coffee and purpose. His left leg was throbbing constantly now. The old IED injury couldn't handle standing this long. But every time he thought about stopping, he'd see another veteran arrive, another person hoping someone would finally hear them. And he couldn't look away. Diesel noticed, said nothing yet, but Grayson could feel the concern in the way Diesel watched him limp across the garage, the way he'd bring food without asking, the way he'd take over simpler tasks to give Grayson's leg a break. Sienna noticed too. She'd catch Grayson's eye when his limp got worse. "Mouth, are you okay?" He'd nod, lie, keep working, because there were too many people who needed help, and only one person who could see what needed to be seen. By day 10, they'd helped 27 veterans. The wall behind Grayson's workbench, which had once held only his Army photo, now displayed something else. 27 photographs. Every veteran Grayson had helped. Names written below each photo. Faces smiling in ways their families probably hadn't seen in years. Sienna had started a YouTube channel. "Fix What's Broken," her voice narrating veteran stories. Before and after footage. Technical explanations of modifications. The first video got 3,000 views. The second got 12,000. The third, featuring an 8-year-old boy named Tyler racing through the garage in his modified wheelchair, got 2 million views in 48 hours. The comment sections were filled with people sharing their own stories, their own pain, their own hope that maybe someone would listen to them too. Day 14. 2 weeks since Sienna had first rolled into Grayson's garage. The cookout was Diesel's idea Saturday afternoon. The parking lot filled with motorcycles and wheelchairs and walkers, veterans and their families. The brotherhood and the community they were building, music playing, food grilling, laughter echoing off the garage walls. Grayson stood to the side watching it all, feeling simultaneously part of it and separate from it. His leg was on fire. His back was screaming. He was exhausted in a way that went deeper than just physical fatigue. But he'd never felt more alive. Diesel approached with 2 beers, handed one to Grayson, stood beside him in comfortable silence for a moment. "You know what you are now?" Diesel finally asked. Grayson shook his head. "Essential," Diesel said, and there was no joke in his voice, no exaggeration. "You're our brother, and brothers protect each other, always." Before Grayson could respond, Sienna wheeled over. She was laughing at something Hawk had said, her face bright with joy, not just the absence of pain, but genuine happiness. She looked up at Grayson and her expression shifted, concerned. "You're limping worse." "I'm fine." "Grayson." She said his name the way someone might speak to a stubborn child. I documented my pain for 2 years. I know what hiding suffering looks like. You need to rest. After Tyler's chair is finished. Tyler can wait, Diesel interrupted. You can't. But Grayson was already shaking his head, already planning tomorrow's work, already thinking about the appointment schedule Sienna had built out for the next 2 weeks. He didn't see the look that passed between Sienna and Diesel, the concern that was growing into something closer to alarm. Because Grayson Merrick had learned in the Army that mechanics keep soldiers alive, that every bolt matters, that you don't stop until the job is done. He'd carried that lesson home with him, and it was about to destroy him. Day 24, November 19th, 11 p.m. Grayson was under a wheelchair, adjusting the suspension system for a 9-year-old girl named Lily. Cerebral palsy, same injury pattern as Sienna had documented, same kind of equipment failure. His vision was blurring. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed too bright, then too dim, pulsing in a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. His left leg wasn't just aching anymore. It was screaming. The old shrapnel wounds felt like they were on fire, and there was a new pain spreading up from his ankle. Hot, throbbing, the kind of pain that meant something was seriously wrong. But Tyler's chair was almost finished. Just this last adjustment, just this one more bolt. Grayson reached for his wrench. His hand shook. The tool slipped from his grip, clattering to the concrete floor. He tried to roll out from under the wheelchair. To stand up, to prove he was fine. His leg gave out completely. Grayson crashed into the workbench. Tools scattered. The sound of metal hitting concrete echoed through the garage like gunshots. And then the floor rushed up to meet him, and everything went black. He woke to Sienna's voice screaming his name. Grayson, somebody help Dad. Hands on him. Multiple people. Diesel's voice barking orders. Call 911. Now. Hawk, get the first aid kit. Cole, clear the floor. Grayson tried to speak, to tell them he was fine. Just needed a minute. But his mouth wouldn't form the words. He heard sirens. Close. Getting closer. Someone must have already called. Diesel's face appeared above him, those gray eyes fierce with concern. Stay with me, brother. Help's coming. You're going to be fine. But Grayson could see in his eyes that Diesel wasn't sure that was true. The paramedics arrived, efficient, professional, asking questions Grayson couldn't quite focus on. How long has the leg been infected? Infected blood sugar critically high. Is he diabetic? Diabetic severe exhaustion. Dehydration. When's the last time he ate a full meal? Grayson couldn't remember. They loaded him onto a gurney, started an IV, the fluorescent lights of his garage giving way to the spinning red and blue of the ambulance. The last thing he saw before they closed the doors was Sienna's face, tears streaming down her cheeks, mouth forming words he couldn't hear over the sirens. And Grayson understood with devastating clarity what he'd done. He'd learned in the Army that mechanics keep soldiers alive, that you don't stop until the job is done. But he'd forgotten the other lesson, the one Sergeant Chen had tried to teach him before that final deployment. You can't save everyone if you kill yourself trying. The hospital room was too white, too clean, too quiet after the constant noise of the garage. Grayson woke to find an IV in his arm monitors beeping softly and his left leg elevated and wrapped in bandages that smelled like antiseptic. A doctor stood at the foot of his bed, young, competent looking, reading from a chart with an expression that said she'd seen this before and was tired of seeing it again. Mr. Merrick, I'm Dr. Sarah Vance. You're at Mesa General. You've been here for 6 hours. Grayson's throat was dry. What happened? What happened is you tried to work yourself to death and nearly succeeded. Her tone was matter of fact. No sympathy, just facts. Your left leg has a severe infection. The old shrapnel wounds reopened under stress, and you ignored it long enough for it to turn septic. Another day and you'd have been looking at amputation. Maybe septic shock. Grayson felt his stomach drop. You're also showing early signs of diabetes, blood sugar dangerously high, combined with severe exhaustion and dehydration. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours, ate 3 meals in a day? Grayson couldn't answer. That's what I thought. But Vance set down her chart. Merrick, you're 34 years old. Your body can't sustain what you've been doing. 18-hour days, standing on a damaged leg, skipping meals, running on coffee and adrenaline. She leaned forward. Here's what happens next. We treat the infection aggressively. You stay here minimum 48 hours. Then you go home and you rest. For weeks. And if you keep pushing like this, you'll lose that leg. Permanently. Do you understand? Grayson stared at the ceiling. Thought about the appointment schedule Sienna had built. 20 veterans waiting. Lily's wheelchair unfinished. I have people depending on me. And they'll still be there when you recover. If you recover, right now you need to depend on yourself for once. The door opened. Diesel, Sienna, Hawk, and Cole filled the room. They'd been waiting outside, probably heard everything. Sienna wheeled up to his bedside. Her eyes were red from crying, but her expression was fierce. This is my fault, she said. Sienna, no. Let me finish. Her voice was quiet but firm. I asked you to help veterans. I organized the schedule. I pushed for more and more appointments because people needed help. But I never asked if you needed help. I never checked if you were okay. She grabbed his hand. I spent 2 years in pain and stayed silent because I thought asking for help made me weak. And I just watched you do the same thing. Diesel stepped forward. She's right. We all saw you pushing too hard. Saw you limping worse every day. And we didn't stop you because we wanted to believe you were okay. Hawk wheeled closer. Brother, I gave you my dog tags because you earned them. But you know what Marines learn: mission accomplished means nothing if you're dead. Cole nodded. You taught us to listen to the people using equipment, to trust when they say something's wrong. So listen to your body, man. It's screaming that something's wrong. The room fell silent except for the beeping of monitors. Finally, Sienna spoke again. You gave me back my voice. You taught me that my pain mattered, that documentation matters, that listening matters. She squeezed his hand. So I'm going to return the favor. Your pain matters. Your body's limits matter. And we're going to listen whether you want us to or not. She looked at Diesel, at Hawk, at Cole, then back at Grayson. You built something amazing, but you built it by destroying yourself. So here's what happens next. You rest, you heal, and we keep the mission running without you. Sienna, you can't. We can. We've been watching you for 3 weeks, learning, taking notes. Hawk and Cole can handle simpler repairs now. I can manage intake and documentation. Dad can coordinate logistics. Her expression softened slightly. You taught us well. Now trust us to use what you taught. Grayson looked around at their faces. This community he'd somehow built. These people who'd become family. And he realized Sienna was right. He'd learned to listen to machines, to users, to pain that others dismissed, but he'd stopped listening to himself. Lily's wheelchair, he started, will be finished by Hawk and Cole working together, Sienna interrupted, following your notes, using your methods, and when you're healed, you can check their work and teach them what they missed. She smiled slightly. You can't save everyone if you kill yourself trying. That's what my dad told me when I wanted to document every single hour of my pain, even when I was exhausted. You have to trust others to help carry the weight. Diesel put his hand on Grayson's shoulder. You're our brother now. That means we take care of you too, whether you like it or not. Grayson closed his eyes, felt the weight of 24 days of constant work finally settling on him like a physical thing. He was so tired. God, he was tired. Okay, he whispered. Okay. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Grayson Merrick let himself rest. He stayed in the hospital for 3 days, not 2. The infection was worse than Dr. Vance initially thought. They pumped him full of antibiotics and fluids and lectures about self-care that sounded uncomfortably similar to what his ex-wife used to say. Sienna visited every day, sometimes alone, sometimes with Diesel, always with updates on the garage. Hawk and Cole finished Lily's wheelchair. She tested it yesterday. Rolled straight to her mom and said it was like floating on a cloud. Her words. We've started training 2 more mechanics, both veterans. One lost his arm in Iraq, uses a prosthetic. The other has PTSD, says working with his hands helps. They're learning fast. YouTube channel hit 100,000 subscribers. Tyler's video is up to 5 million views. People from 12 different states asking if we can help them. Each update was delivered with the same fierce pride Sienna had shown that first day when she'd revealed her notebook. She'd found her purpose, and she wasn't going to let anyone, including Grayson, take it away by burning out. On day 3, Dr. Vance cleared him to go home with strict instructions. 2 weeks minimum rest, physical therapy for the leg, blood sugar monitoring. And Mr. Merrick, if I see you back here because you ignored medical advice, I'll admit you for a month. Don't test me. Diesel drove him home, not to Grayson's apartment above the garage, but to a house Grayson didn't recognize. Whose place is this? Yours now. Brotherhood bought it, paid first and last month's rent. Fully furnished. Ground floor so you don't have to climb stairs with that leg. Diesel, I can't. You can and you will. Arguing means you don't trust us to take care of family. That an insult you want to make. Grayson, shut up. The house was small, clean. In a neighborhood that didn't make him check his 6 every time he walked outside. There was a hospital bed set up in the living room, rails and all. Sienna was waiting inside with enough meal-prepped food to feed an army. You're on house arrest for 2 weeks. Hawk and Cole will bring you updates. I'll video call daily with appointment schedules and any questions they have. You'll consult Teach Guide, but you won't stand for 18 hours. You won't skip meals. You won't destroy yourself. She wheeled up close and looked him in the eye. You saved me by listening. I'm saving you by making you rest. We're even. For 2 weeks, Grayson learned something he'd never been good at: letting go. He consulted via video call, watched Hawk and Cole work through complex repairs with a competence that surprised him, guided them through problems, taught them troubleshooting techniques. But he didn't do the work himself. The garage kept running. Veterans kept being helped. The mission continued without him at the center. And slowly, painfully, Grayson healed. His legs stopped screaming, started to just ache normally. Physical therapy helped him rebuild strength without pushing too hard. Blood sugar stabilized with proper diet and medication. But more than his body healing, something else shifted. Grayson realized he'd been carrying the same burden since Afghanistan. The belief that if he wasn't constantly vigilant, constantly working, constantly saving people, then he didn't deserve to have survived when others didn't. 3 KIA markers on that photograph. 3 friends who didn't come home. And Grayson had been trying to earn his survival ever since. Trying to save enough people, fix enough problems, sacrifice enough of himself that maybe the universe would decide his life had been worth preserving. But that's not how it worked. Survival wasn't something you earned. It was something you built from. And building required rest, required trust, required accepting that you couldn't do everything alone. Sienna had learned that lesson at 16. Grayson was learning it at 34. By the end of 2 weeks, when Dr. Vance cleared him to return to work with restrictions, Grayson felt something he hadn't felt in years. Ready, not desperate, not driven by guilt or fear or the need to prove his worth. Just ready to do the work, with people who had his back, who wouldn't let him destroy himself again. He returned to the garage on a Monday morning, December 7th, 3 weeks since he'd collapsed. The place looked different, more organized, more professional. Sienna's influence, obvious in every detail. Hawk and Cole were training 2 new mechanics, the veterans Sienna had mentioned, working through a wheelchair diagnosis with careful precision, using Grayson's methods, but making them their own. The wall of photographs had grown. 47 faces now, 47 veterans helped in 3 weeks. Sienna looked up from her desk when Grayson walked in. Her face lit up. You're walking better. 2 weeks of PT and actually sleeping. Turns out rest helps. She rolled over, stopped in front of him, looked up with those hazel eyes that saw everything. Welcome back. But if I catch you working more than 8 hours or skipping meals, I'm telling Dr. Vance. Deal. Diesel emerged from the back office, saw Grayson, nodded once. That single nod contained everything. Welcome back. We missed you. We've got this. You're home. And Grayson understood something profound. He'd spent years running a failing garage alone, drowning in bills and isolation and the weight of trying to prove he mattered. Then a 16-year-old girl had rolled through his door with a notebook full of desperate calculations and a hidden plea for help. And everything had changed, not because Grayson had saved her, but because she trusted him enough to show him how to save himself. By letting others in, by building community, by accepting that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help. The garage hummed with activity, veterans being helped, mechanics being trained, a mission growing beyond anything Grayson could have built alone. And Grayson Merrick broke mechanic with a bum leg and a second chance, rolled up his sleeves and got back to work. But this time he wasn't working alone. This time he was working with family. And that made all the difference. December 9th, Tuesday morning, 9:47 a.m. Sienna sat at her desk in the garage managing the appointment schedule for the week when her laptop chimed with a new email. She almost didn't open it. Probably another request for help from someone who'd seen the YouTube channel. She'd gotten hundreds of those in the past 3 weeks, but the subject line made her pause. Cease and desist, unauthorized medical device modifications. The sender, Victor Kane, CEO, Prime Care Medical Systems. Sienna's heart started to pound. She opened the email and read, Miss Thorne, we've become aware of unauthorized modifications to Prime Care proprietary medical devices promoted via your YouTube channel, Fix What's Broken. Our legal team has identified serious concerns. 1. Unlicensed medical practice, wheelchair modifications require FDA certification. Trademark infringement, Prime Care branding, visible in videos. Liability exposure injuries from unauthorized modifications. Defamation videos imply Prime Care equipment causes harm. We demand immediate cessation of all modification activities. Removal of YouTube channel and all videos. Public retraction of claims against Prime Care equipment. Surrender of modified devices for inspection. Failure to comply within 72 hours will result in legal action against you, your father, and Mr. Merrick. We will seek damages, injunctions, and criminal charges where applicable. This is not negotiable. Victor Kane, CEO, Prime Care Medical Systems. Sienna read the email 3 times. Each time her hands shook a little more. They were threatening to sue her, her father, Grayson, everything they'd built in the past month, because she told the truth. Her first instinct was to run to Grayson, to show him, to let him handle it. But Sienna had learned something in the past month. She'd learned that silence was complicity, that hiding problems made them worse, that the only way to fight systems that failed people was to expose them. So instead of panicking, she started researching. She spent Tuesday researching Victor Kane and Prime Care Medical Systems. What she found made her blood run cold. Prime Care controlled 47% of the disability equipment market, $2.3 billion in annual revenue. Victor Kane had been CEO for 8 years. His compensation was tied directly to profit margins, not patient outcomes. But it was the lawsuit history that really opened Sienna's eyes. 14 settled cases in the past 5 years, all sealed, all involving equipment failures and injuries. Prime Care had paid to make the lawsuits disappear before they could expose systemic problems. Then Sienna found something even more damning. A ProPublica investigation from 6 months ago. Leaked internal emails showing Prime Care engineers had warned about design flaws in their 2023 wheelchair line, the same line Sienna's chair had come from. The engineers had flagged issues with weight distribution, wheel alignment, brake timing, everything Grayson had identified and fixed. But the warnings had been overruled by the finance department. Meeting quarterly earnings targets was more important than addressing safety concerns. Kane's bonus that year, $3.2 million in stock options. Based on margin improvement from cost-cutting measures. Sienna downloaded every article, every leaked email, every piece of evidence she could find. By Wednesday morning, she had a file 3 inches thick. Digital and physical documentation of Prime Care's pattern of prioritizing profits over people. She also had a plan, but she needed help, and she couldn't do this alone. Wednesday afternoon, Sienna called a meeting. Not at the garage, at Diesel's house. Private, just the core team. Grayson, Diesel, Haw, Cole, and Marlena. Cole's wife had a paralegal background. She'd been helping with documentation and paperwork. Sienna showed them the email. Watch their reactions shift from concern to anger. He's threatening to sue us. Diesel's voice was quiet, dangerous. For helping people, he's threatening to destroy us, Sienna corrected. 500,000 in damages, injunctions, criminal charges. He wants to make an example of us, to scare anyone else from speaking up. Grayson ran his hand through his hair. We don't have money for lawyers. If he actually files, he will file, Marlena interrupted. She was reading the email on her phone, her paralegal instincts kicking in. This isn't a bluff. This is corporate intimidation 101. Threaten massive damages. Hope you can't afford lawyers. Force a settlement where you shut down and sign an NDA. So what do we do? Hawk asked. Back down. Sienna looked around at the people who'd become her family. These men who'd served their country, who'd been failed by the system, who'd found hope in a crumbling garage in Mesa. No, she said firmly, we don't back down, we fight back. She pulled out her laptop and opened the file she'd been building. Victor Kane thinks he can silence us with money and lawyers. But he's made a mistake. He's attacking a 16-year-old girl who spent 2 years documenting her suffering in precise scientific detail, who taught herself how to build evidence, how to expose the truth. She turned the laptop around so everyone could see. Prime Care has 14 sealed lawsuits. I found the case numbers. We can subpoena them in discovery. Kane's internal emails show he knew about design flaws and ignored them for profit. And we have 73 veterans whose lives improved with modified equipment. 0 injuries, 0 complications. Just people who stopped hurting. Her voice grew stronger. Kane has money and lawyers. We have something more powerful. We have the truth. And we have people whose voices matter. Diesel was staring at his daughter with an expression of awe. When did you become a strategist? When I spent 2 years with nothing to do but think and research and plan. Sienna looked at Marlena. Can we win? Marlena was quiet for a long moment, reading through the evidence. Finally, she nodded. If we do this right, yes. His case is weak. Modified equipment with 0 injuries versus his 14 sealed lawsuits. A judge will tear him apart. But we need more than just defense. We need to go on offense. Offense how? Grayson asked. Sienna smiled, not a happy smile, a fierce one. We make him a story. We make this public. We make it so loud that settling quietly isn't an option. She pulled up her phone and showed them a contact. Jennifer Ochoa, the reporter who'd covered their story 3 weeks ago. She left me her number, said if anything interesting happened to call her. Well, something interesting is happening. Over the next 3 days, Sienna orchestrated a counteroffensive that would have made military strategists proud. Step 1, document everything. Marlena helped her compile a comprehensive file, every veteran they'd helped, before and after videos, pain assessments, medical improvements, testimonials from families. Not just anecdotal evidence, but systematic documentation that could hold up in court. Step 2, legal defense. Marlena reached out to ASU's legal clinic. They took cases pro bono for students and faculty, but sometimes extended to community cases with educational value. A professor named Hernandez agreed to review their situation. This is a slap suit, Professor Hernandez said after reading Kane's email. Strategic lawsuit against public participation, designed to silence criticism through legal intimidation. Arizona has anti-slap statutes. We can not only defend, we can countersue for frivolous litigation. Step 3, media warfare. Jennifer Ochoa's eyes lit up when Sienna called. A billion-dollar medical company is threatening to sue a disabled teenager for helping veterans, and you have internal emails showing they knew their equipment was flawed. This is front-page material. She agreed to hold the story until Monday, December 15th. Give them time to prepare. But once it ran, it would be national coverage. Wall Street Journal, not just local news. Step 4, coalition building. Sienna reached out to every veteran they'd helped, explained the situation, asked if they'd be willing to go on record, to write letters to Congress, to stand with them. The response was overwhelming. All 73 veterans agreed. Within 48 hours, Sienna had congressional letters drafted, signed, and ready to send. Petitions circulating through veteran advocacy groups, VF and American Legion chapters issuing statements of support. Step 5, social media mobilization. Sienna created a video for the YouTube channel. Calm, factual, no dramatics, just her in her wheelchair explaining what was happening. Prime Care Medical Systems is threatening to sue me for telling the truth, for showing what happened when someone finally listened to my pain, for helping veterans who've been failed by a system that cares more about profits than people. She held up Kane's email. They want me silent. They want to shut down the garage. They want to make sure no one else speaks up about equipment that hurts them. She looked directly into the camera. But I was silent for 2 years, and I'm not going silent again. The video went live Friday, December 12th. It had 100,000 views in 6 hours. 500,000 by Saturday morning. The comments section exploded. People sharing their own stories, their own failures with medical equipment, their own experiences being dismissed by systems that should have helped them. Hashtag #FixWhat'sBroken started trending, not just locally, nationally. By Sunday, December 14th, the story had taken on a life of its own. PrimeCare's stock dropped 8%. Investors were demanding answers. Board members were calling emergency meetings. And Victor Kane was about to make his second mistake. He agreed to a CNN interview for Sunday evening. Damage control. Spin the narrative. Remind everyone that PrimeCare was a respected company with safety standards and protocols. The interview was a disaster. The CNN reporter, armed with Sienna's research and Jennifer Ochoa's investigation, didn't let Kane control the narrative. Mr. Kane, you're suing a 16-year-old girl in a wheelchair. How do you justify that? Kane smoothed but starting to sweat. This isn't about Miss Thorne personally. It's about safety standards and liability protection. Your equipment hurt her for 2 years. Mr. Merrick's modifications helped her walk again. Where's the liability? Well, there's potential risk in unauthorized modifications. 73 veterans, 0 injuries. Your company, 14 sealed lawsuits, which is riskier. Those lawsuits are taken out of context. They were settled without admission of wrongdoing. Convenient, so we have no way to learn from your failures. The reporter leaned forward. We have internal emails showing your engineers warned about design flaws in 2023. You ignored them to meet profit targets. Care to comment? Kane's face went pale. No further comment. One more question, Mr. Kane. Your bonus structure is tied to profit margins, not patient outcomes. Do you see any conflict of interest there when it comes to equipment safety? No further comment. The interview ended. Kane looked like a man who just realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. By Monday morning, #FixWhat'sBroken was the #1 trending topic on social media. Sienna's YouTube video had 4 million views. PrimeCare's stock had dropped another 6%. And Jennifer Ochoa's story broke on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Corporate medical giant sues disabled teen for helping veterans. Subheading internal emails show PrimeCare executives ignored safety warnings to protect profits. The article was devastating, comprehensive. It featured Sienna's full story with her permission. 73 veteran testimonials, leaked emails showing the pattern of prioritizing earnings over safety. Kane's compensation structure. The 14 sealed lawsuits. A side-by-side comparison. PrimeCare equipment responsible for documented harm in sealed cases versus Merrick modifications with 0 injuries and measurable improvements in quality of life. The business world paid attention. This wasn't just a feel-good at human interest story. This was corporate malfeasance exposed. Fiduciary duty violated. A CEO who'd put shareholder returns above customer safety. Institutional investors started asking very uncomfortable questions. By Tuesday, PrimeCare's board had called an emergency meeting. Kane's position as CEO was suddenly very much in question. And that's when everything shifted. Senator Patricia Martinez, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, read Jennifer Ochoa's article over coffee Tuesday morning. By noon, her office had drafted a hearing proposal. VA equipment procurement reform and user safety standards. Fast-tracked for Wednesday, December 18th, 1 week away. Sienna got the call Tuesday afternoon, an aide from Senator Martinez's office. Ms. Thorne, the senator would like you to testify, along with Mr. Merrick and representatives from PrimeCare. We're examining systemic failures in disability equipment, procurement, and the need for user-centered design standards. Sienna's hands shook as she held the phone. I'll be there. She hung up and immediately called Grayson, Dieselhawk, and Cole. Emergency meeting, again. They want me to testify before Congress. Diesel looked concerned. Sienna, that's a lot of pressure. I can handle it. Her voice was firm. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about changing the system, making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. She looked at Grayson. They want you to testify too. As the technical expert, Grayson nodded slowly. Okay, when next Wednesday, Washington, D.C. Sienna paused. Dr. Vance cleared me to travel, but she warned me. Stress could cause a setback. I'm taking the risk. Then we all go, Diesel said. You're not doing this alone. By Friday, the plan was set. Sienna, Grayson, Diesel, Hawk, and Cole would fly to Washington Tuesday, December 17th. Testify Wednesday morning. Return Wednesday night. Marlena and Professor Hernandez would join them. Legal support and coaching on testimony. How to speak clearly. How to handle hostile questioning. How to stay calm under pressure. Sienna spent the weekend preparing, writing out her testimony, practicing delivery, anticipating questions. She'd shown her notebook to 5 people: Grayson, Diesel, Hawk, Cole, and Marlena. Now she was about to show it to the United States Senate. The weight of that responsibility was crushing. But Sienna had learned something in the past 2 months. Silence was heavier than speaking. Hiding was harder than standing up. And sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was tell your truth, even when your voice shook. Tuesday, December 17th. The flight to Washington was quiet. Diesel sat next to Sienna, one protective hand on her wheelchair. Grayson across the aisle reviewing his technical notes. Hawk and Cole behind them, offering steady support just by being there. They landed at Reagan National at 4 p.m., checked into a hotel near Capitol Hill, spent the evening in final preparation with Professor Hernandez. Sienna, you'll testify after the technical experts. After Grayson, they'll establish the mechanical failures. You'll establish the human cost. Don't try to be someone you're not. Just tell your story, your truth. That's all you need. What if they don't believe me? Bring your notebook. Let the data speak. You've documented 2 years of suffering in scientific terms. That's not opinion, that's evidence. That night, Sienna couldn't sleep. She sat by the hotel window looking out at the Capitol building lit up against the dark sky. Somewhere in that building, decisions were made that affected millions of lives. Laws written, policies set, systems built that either help people or hurt them. And tomorrow, a 16-year-old girl from Mesa, Arizona was going to tell the most powerful people in the country that they'd built a system that failed. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through the messages that had been flooding in since the Wall Street Journal article. Hundreds of people, thousands, sharing their stories, their pain, their hope that maybe someone was finally listening. One message stood out. From a mother in Ohio, my daughter is 8, cerebral palsy, her wheelchair hurts her. She's been crying every night. But I didn't know what to do. Insurance won't cover a new one. Doctors say she needs to adjust. But after seeing your story, I called a local mechanic. He's going to look at it. You gave us hope. Thank you. Sienna read it 3 times. Then she got up, got her notebook, and went back to the window. She opened to the first page. Day 1, October 30, 2023, age 14. 2 years ago, she'd started documenting because she didn't know what else to do, because she needed proof, because she thought if she had enough data, eventually someone would listen. Tomorrow, someone would listen. Not just someone, everyone. Sienna closed the notebook and whispered to the Capitol building, I'm ready. Wednesday, December 18th, 9 a.m., Senate hearing room. The room was packed, every seat filled. Media cameras lined the back wall. Senators arranged in a semicircle elevated looking down on the witness table. Sienna sat in her wheelchair at the witness table, Grayson beside her. Behind them, Diesel, Hawk, Cole, Professor Hernandez, Marlena, a wall of support. On the other side of the room, Victor Kane and a team of 8 lawyers. Prime Care's legal army, all expensive suits and briefcases and confident expressions that said they'd done this before and won. Senator Martinez gavelled the hearing to order. This hearing will examine current practices in VA disability equipment, procurement, the adequacy of user safety standards, and the need for reform. We'll hear from technical experts, medical professionals, users, and industry representatives. The morning session began with expert testimony. Dr. Patricia Vance, the neurologist who treated Sienna, testified first. Ms. Thorne's case is medically significant. Her recovery from classified permanent paralysis demonstrates what's possible when chronic equipment-induced pain is eliminated. This is rare but documented. It shows the critical importance of proper equipment design with genuine user feedback. Next came Professor Hernandez, explaining SLAP litigation and corporate intimidation tactics. Prime Care's lawsuit against Ms. Thorne is textbook strategic litigation designed to silence public criticism. These tactics are used across industries to prevent consumers from speaking about product failures. Then Grayson took the stand. Senator Collins, who had Prime Care donors, went on the attack immediately. Mr. Merrick, what are your qualifications? You have a GED and military training versus Prime Care's engineers with PhDs and decades of experience. Grayson stayed calm. He'd been prepared for this. Senator, I have 8 years keeping soldiers alive in Afghanistan by catching flaws that engineers with those PhDs missed. I have 73 veterans with measurably improved quality of life, 0 injuries from modifications. And I have this. He held up Sienna's hidden note, the one she'd tucked in her wheelchair cushion 2 years ago. Someone please help, it hurts. He let the silence sit for a moment. This is what happens when we value credentials over compassion. When we listen to corporations over the people using their products. When we design for spec sheets instead of human beings. Senator Martinez leaned forward. Mr. Merrick, can you explain in simple terms what was wrong with Miss Thorne's original equipment? Grayson did. Clearly, methodically, weight distribution, wheel alignment, brake timing, joystick sensitivity. Each flaw documented, each modification explained. The original chair was built to look advanced. My modifications were built for Miss Thorne specifically. That's the difference. Next, Victor Kane testified. He'd been coached extensively, stayed on message. Corporate speak about safety standards and liability and regulatory compliance. But Senator Martinez had done her homework. Mr. Kane, we have internal emails from your engineering team. March 2023. They flagged design flaws in the wheelchair line that included Miss Thorne's chair, specifically mentioning weight distribution issues and brake timing problems. These warnings were overruled by your finance department. Can you explain why safety warnings were ignored? Kane's confidence faltered. Senator, those emails are taken out of context. The context is clear. Your engineers identified problems. Finance said fixing them would cut into margins. The problems weren't addressed. That same year, your bonus was $3.2 million based on margin improvement. Do you see any conflict of interest? Senator, my compensation isn't relevant to. Your compensation is directly tied to profit margins, not patient outcomes. That seems very relevant to a discussion about why safety warnings were ignored. Kane had no good answer. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. We'll now hear from Miss Sienna Thorne. The room expected Sienna to roll to the witness table in her wheelchair. That's what the seating arrangement had been designed for. But Sienna had other plans. She stood up from her wheelchair, used the forearm crutches Grayson had modified for her. And she walked. The room went silent, completely silent. Every step was deliberate, powerful, a statement without words. She walked from the back of the room to the witness table. 90 seconds, 50 steps, every senator watching, every camera filming, Victor Kane's face going pale. She reached the table, set her crutches aside, sat in the chair provided. Senator Martinez had tears in her eyes. Miss Thorne, please take your time. Sienna adjusted the microphone, looked out at the room, at the senators who would decide whether anything changed, at Kane and his lawyers who wanted her silent, at her father and Grayson and Hawk and Cole who'd given her the strength to be here. She took a breath and began. My name is Sienna Thorne. I'm 16 years old. 2 years ago, doctors said I'd never walk again. They were wrong. She held up her notebook, but not because of any miracle, because someone finally listened to me. She opened the notebook to the first page, showed it to the room. This is day 1, October 30th, 2023. I was 14 years old. I just gotten my new wheelchair, $43,000, designed by specialists, built by Prime Care Medical Systems, top of the line. She turned pages slowly. This is 730 days of documentation, 11,680 hours of data, pain scales, force diagrams, mechanical calculations, everything I could measure with a ruler and determination. Her voice grew stronger. I taught myself mechanical engineering from YouTube videos at 2 a.m. when the pain wouldn't let me sleep. I learned CAD software. I studied suspension systems and weight distribution and ergonomic design. Not because I wanted to, because I had to, because nobody with credentials would believe me when I said something was wrong. She looked directly at Kane. Mr. Kane's company built a beautiful wheelchair, award-winning, expensive, and it tortured me for 730 days. She held up a specific page, Pain scale 9-10, shoulder compensation diagram, calculations showing the cumulative damage. My father, she gestured to Diesel in the audience. He's not in a suit. He's in leather with Hell's Angels patches. He's a biker. And he spent $43,000 trusting experts, believing that credentials meant competence, that price meant quality. Her voice softened. And those experts failed me, failed him, failed everyone who trusted that equipment built by professionals would actually work. She closed the notebook. But a broke mechanic in a failing garage believed me, believed my pain was real, believed my research mattered, believed that a 16-year-old girl might actually know more about her suffering than strangers with degrees who'd never sat in that chair. Senator Collins interrupted. Ms. Thorne, Prime Care's equipment is FDA approved, tested, certified. Are you saying all of that is meaningless? Sienna looked at him steadily. I'm saying none of that helped me. None of that stopped my pain. None of that listened when I said something was wrong. She stood up again, removed her crutches completely, stood unsupported for 30 seconds. The room absolutely silent. Mr. Kane sees quarterly earnings. Grayson Merrick saw me, a 16-year-old girl screaming for help in the only language anyone seemed to respect. Data, measurements, scientific documentation. She took 5 steps toward Kane's table. Across the hearing room, every senator watching, Kane unable to look away. These steps exist because Grayson fixed what you broke, because he listened when you wouldn't, because he believed equipment should serve people, not profit margins. She turned to face the senators. I'm 16 years old. I have no law degree, no medical credentials. But I have something Mr. Kane doesn't. She held up the notebook again. I have 11,680 hours of lived experience. I know what it's like to be trapped in equipment designed by people who never asked if it worked, who never followed up, who never cared if I was okay as long as the paperwork said the equipment met specifications. She looked at the veterans filling the gallery, 50 wheelchairs, 50 people who'd served their country and been failed by the system that should have protected them. These veterans gave their bodies, their futures, their peace of mind, and our system thanks them with equipment that hurts them because it's cheaper, because it meets minimum standards, because nobody wants to admit that maybe we're doing this wrong. Her voice rose. I'm not asking you to punish Prime Care. I'm asking you to fix the system, require user testing, real testing, not one measurement in a clinical setting, 6-month follow-ups, veteran feedback panels, independent safety reviews. She placed the notebook on the witness table. Make companies listen to the people using their equipment. Make them care if we're okay. Make them prove their products work not just on paper, but in the real lives of real people who depend on them. She looked at Senator Martinez. Because if a 16-year-old girl with a notebook and a broke mechanic with a salvaged parts can do better than a billion-dollar corporation, she let the pause sit, let it land. Maybe we've been listening to the wrong experts. She returned to her chair, sat down, done. The room erupted, not with questions, with applause. Senators weren't supposed to show bias. But several were wiping their eyes. Even Senator Collins looked shaken. The veterans in the gallery stood, or wheeled forward. Silent solidarity, the most powerful statement of all. Senator Martinez gavelled for order, but she was crying too. Thank you, Miss Thorne. That's the most compelling testimony I've heard in 20 years of public service. She looked at Kane. Mr. Kane, do you have any response? Kane looked at his lawyers. They whispered urgently. Finally, he spoke. We'd like to request a recess to discuss settlement options. Settlement, Senator Martinez's voice was sharp. You threatened this young woman with a lawsuit, tried to silence her. And now that she's told her story to the nation, you want to settle. Senator, perhaps we can discuss this privately. No, you made this public when you sued her. You'll address it publicly now. Kane looked trapped, desperate. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Prime Care is prepared to drop the lawsuit, offer a public apology, and hire Mr. Merrick as a consultant. What about the equipment? Sienna's voice cut through. What about the design flaws your engineers warned you about? What about the 14 sealed lawsuits? What about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else? Kane looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression changed. The corporate mask slipped. Underneath was something human, something ashamed. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're right, and I'm wrong, and I forgot. I forgot we're building equipment for human beings. I forgot that behind every product number is a person, someone's daughter, someone's child." He stood up. "Miss Thorne, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you action. Prime Care will implement user testing panels. Real power, not advisory. 20 disabled people reviewing every prototype with veto authority. 6-month mandatory follow-ups with all customers. Transparency in reporting problems." He looked at Grayson. "Mr. Merrick, I want to hire you as chief equipment consultant. 150,000 a year. But only if you keep your garage. Keep helping people directly. We need someone who will tell us the truth." To Sienna and you, youth advisory director, 75,000 a year, part-time remote. Work around school, because we need your voice, your perspective, your refusal to accept broken systems. He sat back down. "I can't undo 2 years of your suffering, but I can make sure it wasn't for nothing. I can make sure the system changes." Senator Martinez looked at Sienna. "Miss Thorne," Sienna was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Mr. Kane, I don't want your money for myself, but I'll accept under conditions." She held up fingers counting. "1, Grayson stays consultant, but keeps his garage. Non-negotiable. 2, I'll advise remotely, but my focus stays on school and continuing to help veterans directly. 3, user testing panel has real power. Not just advisory, actual veto authority. 4, 6-month follow-ups, mandatory and public. Transparency required. 5 million to fund Listen First initiative, the nonprofit I'm starting, with an independent board, not Prime Care controlled." She locked eyes with Kane. "And 6, you personally visit Mesa, meet the 73 veterans, hear their stories, look them in the eye and understand what your company's failures cost them." She leaned forward. "You don't buy redemption, Mr. Kane. You earn it. So earn it." The room was silent, waiting for Kane's response. Finally, he nodded. "All accepted. Every term." Senator Martinez smiled. "Then this committee will draft immediate recommendations. The Thorne Standards Act, mandatory user testing, veteran feedback loops, 6-month assessments. Equipment manufacturers must document user pain reports, penalties for ignoring safety warnings." She looked at Sienna. "You've changed the system, Miss Thorne. Not just for yourself, for everyone." Epilogue 6 months later. June 2026. Mesa, Arizona. The sign outside the garage had changed. Still humble. Still the same cracked concrete and desert dust. But now it read Merrick Mobility Solutions. Listen first. The wall inside had grown. 200 photographs, 200 veterans helped. Names below each photo, faces smiling, and in the center, framed and protected, a small piece of notebook paper with 4 words. "Someone please help. It hurts." Sienna Thorne, now 17, stood in the garage using her forearm crutches. She could walk 200 steps now, used her wheelchair when tired. Not prison anymore. Just a tool she controlled. She'd graduated high school early, been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship, would start in January after spending fall semester working at the garage. Her application essay had opened with, "I was trapped in a $43,000 wheelchair, designed by experts who never asked me if it worked. So I taught myself mechanical engineering at 14, documented 11,680 hours of data, and found the one person willing to believe a 16-year-old girl might know more about her pain than strangers with degrees." She'd been invited to the White House in May when President signed the Thorne Standards Act into law. The photos sat on her desk, President Sienna walking with crutches. Grayson Diesel, 20 veterans. Listen First initiative now operated in 12 cities. 15 more chapters opening by year's end. 500 veterans helped so far. The number growing every week. Prime Care had launched their new wheelchair line. The Thorne series named with Sienna's permission. Designed with a 20-person user panel that Sienna chaired via video call once a month. The testimonials were overwhelming. First-time equipment doesn't hurt. I can finally just live. Someone finally listened. Sales exceeded projections. Turned out quality actually sold. Victor Kane had kept his promise. Visited Mesa in January, met all 73 veterans personally, listened to their stories. One meeting in particular had changed him. A former Marine named Hawk who'd removed his dog tags and given them to a mechanic, saying, "You earned these more than I ever did." Kane had broken down, really broken down. Understood finally what his focus on margins had cost. Saturday morning, June 15th, Sienna taught a workshop in the garage. 8 veteran mechanics Grayson had trained. Subject, listening to equipment, users, not just fixing technical problems. A new arrival interrupted. 7-year-old Lily, cerebral palsy, her mother bringing her in desperate. Sienna wheeled over, the irony not lost on her, using her wheelchair to help others. The tools she'd once hated now part of who she was. She knelt beside Lily's chair, at eye level. "Hi, I'm Sienna. Does your chair hurt?" Lily nodded, tears forming. Finally, someone asked directly, "Tell me where, tell me everything, and I promise we'll listen." Lily whispered her pain points. Sienna took notes, the same hidden journal method she'd once used. Grayson watched from across the garage, smiled. "You're better at this than I ever was." Sienna looked up. "You taught me the most important lesson. It's not about fixing machines. It's about hearing people." Diesel brought coffee, stood with Grayson, watching Sienna work. "You know, when she was born, I was terrified. Didn't know how to be a father. Then after the accident, I was even more terrified. Thought I'd lost her forever. So I threw money at the problem, trusted experts, did everything they said." He paused. "And I never asked the most important question. Are you okay?" "Really okay," Grayson nodded. "Sometimes the hardest thing is admitting we don't have all the answers." "She taught me that. My 16-year-old daughter taught me how to listen." Diesel's voice was thick. "She took pain and turned it into purpose. She's stronger than I ever was." They watched Sienna measuring Lily's chair, documenting pain points, teaching the mother how to advocate, showing her the intake forms, explaining the modification process, not just fixing one chair, building a system, teaching others, making sure no one else suffered in silence. Later that afternoon, Sienna prepared her weekly YouTube video. Fix What's Broken now had 2 million subscribers. She sat in her wheelchair, looked into the camera. "2 years ago, I wrote a note and hid it in my wheelchair. Someone please help, it hurts. I was too afraid to say it out loud because I thought the problem was me." She held up the framed note. "But the problem was never me. It was a system that values credentials over compassion, that designs equipment for spec sheets, not human beings, that tells people to adjust instead of admitting the equipment is wrong." She set down the note. "If you're in pain and everyone tells you to adjust, don't. Your pain is data. Your experience matters. You're not broken. The equipment might be." She stood up, using her crutches, took 10 steps toward the camera. 2 years ago, I couldn't do this, not because my body was broken, because my equipment was, and nobody would believe me when I said so. Now I can walk, not because of miracles, because someone listened." She looked directly into the lens. "This is Sienna Thorne. This is Fix What's Broken, where we believe the best repairs start with hearing the people who hurt." The camera panned to the wall of 200 photos, each person smiling, free from pain. "And we're just getting started." Screen faded to text. Sienna Thorne coordinated repairs for 500-plus disabled veterans across 12 states. She starts MIT Biomedical Engineering Program. January 2027. Listen, first initiative operates in 12 cities, expanding to 27 by year-end. Grayson Merrick continues teaching while consulting for Prime Care. 150K year Diesel and 94 Hells Angels brothers volunteer a support network nationwide. Victor Kane implemented user testing panels. Customer complaints down 81%. Thorne Standards Act signed into law. May 2026. Sienna walks 200-plus steps daily, uses wheelchair by choice, believes the best way to fix what's broken is to listen to people who hurt. Final title card. Expertise doesn't always come with credentials. Sometimes it comes from living the problem long enough to understand the solution. And sometimes it takes a 16-year-old girl to teach the world how to listen. The screen went black. But Sienna's voice continued one last message. If you're suffering in silence, I see you. If you've been told to adjust, I believe you. If you think no one's listening, I'm listening. Your pain matters. Your voice matters. You matter. Don't stay silent. Scream if you have to. Document, research. Find your people. Build your evidence. Because the world needs your truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. I'm Sienna Thorne, and I'm not broken. I'm just getting started. Fade to black, the end. But really it was just the beginning. Because somewhere in Ohio, a mother read Sienna's story and called a local mechanic to look at her daughter's wheelchair. Somewhere in Texas, a veteran saw Grayson's interview and reached out for help. Somewhere in Washington, a senator drafted legislation inspired by a 16-year-old's testimony. And somewhere in Mesa, Arizona, a girl who'd spent 2 years in silent suffering stood in front of a garage full of people she'd helped, looked at her father, looked at the mechanic who'd believed her, and whispered 2 words that changed everything. Thank you. Not for saving her, for hearing her. And that made all the difference. The end. If you believe veterans deserve better than what broken systems provide, please share this story. Comment your thoughts below. And remember, your voice matters. Your pain is real. And somewhere someone is listening. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because the world changes when we choose courage over silence. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that one person with heart and determination can change everything. Until next time, this is Fix What's Broken, where we believe the best repairs start with those brave enough to say, something's wrong. And I won't be quiet until it's fixed.